The story begins with a carriage making its way through a forest dappled with warm sunlight, creating a rhythmic sound as the horse's hooves struck the dirt path. It soon reached its destination, Lancet, the capital of the Herechia Empire, where a majestic palace with an exquisite design and towering spires loomed on the horizon. From the carriage window, a young girl with blonde hair and green eyes peered out, her eyes widening in awe as she contemplated the scene with utter fascination. The girl whispered to her companion that the imperial palace looked far more magnificent than what she had seen in books, while the older woman looked at her with a tender smile. The girl's reaction caught the attention of some other passengers. One lady commented that such wonder indicated she was raised in a remote place and that she seemed strangely proud of her simplicity. The girl, named Ivy, realized they were talking about her but paid them no mind, while one of the companions commented that showing enthusiasm is natural for children. The director, Ivy's companion, shared the same admiration, stating that the view was truly majestic and that she could gaze at it all day without getting bored. Ivy asked her if she felt the same, and the director replied affirmatively, explaining that it had been a long time since her last visit to the capital, making everything seem new and interesting to her as well. Then the director pointed to the nearby market and the variety of fruits it displayed, increasing the excitement of Ivy, who declared in amazement that she had never seen any of these fruits before. This comment sparked the surprise of a passenger who concluded audibly that she must be coming from a distant rural village. The man then addressed her in a condescending tone, advising her to take her time enjoying the view and mockingly wondering what chance a rural girl would ever have to see the imperial palace again. At this point, the director intervened calmly, thanking the man for his interest but telling him there was no need for haste, as Ivy would be residing in the imperial palace starting from that day. Ivy enthusiastically confirmed the director's words, leaving the man in a state of shock and bewilderment, wondering how they could possibly stay in the palace. The man thought they had fallen victim to a con artist who promised them jobs as servants in the palace, but the director denied this with a laugh, clarifying that it was not about a job. It was then announced that Ivy, starting from that day, would join the Imperial Academy for the Gifted. The man was stunned to hear the academy's name, saying that even nobles find it difficult to enroll, wondering how a girl like her could achieve that. He questioned if they had some special academic trick, while the director looked on with pride and dignity. Ivy recalled those moments in her mind, realizing that although she knew of her own intelligence, the director was the happiest person of all when the acceptance notice arrived. A memory surfaced of the director hugging her with overwhelming joy, expressing pride in her and expecting Ivy to be the smartest in the academy. Ivy admitted to herself that if it weren't for the director, she wouldn't have even been able to apply to the academy, as she was the one who rescued her from that miserable place. Memories took her back to the night the director arrived at a modest inn, telling the owner she would stay for only one night in exchange for 5 silver coins. Inside, young Ivy was sitting on the floor in a pitiful state, while a harsh voice ordered her to get out immediately if she didn't intend to work. An angry woman appeared, scolding her and describing her as useless. The woman continued to abuse her, saying that whoever takes care of her upbringing should be repaid with hard work, denouncing her grumbling about the simple tasks requested of her. Then she threw her out into the open, and the child sat trembling from cold and fear, begging and apologizing, promising to do anything asked of her. Her only wish was not to be expelled and left alone. At that moment, the director appeared and intervened firmly, ordering the woman to stop immediately, denouncing her cruel treatment of a small child, and embraced Ivy to protect her. Then she knelt down to check on Ivy's condition, asking anxiously if she was okay after noticing how emaciated she was. And the child replied in a faint voice that she was fine. The director stood up and confronted the innkeeper, wondering if she even fed the child, to which the woman coldly replied that the child was 5 years old and must earn her keep. The woman then rudely asked the director about her identity that authorized her to interfere in a matter that didn't concern her, as long as she wouldn't take over the child's upbringing herself. Facing this challenge, the director offered to take the child with her, and the woman met the offer with a cynical look and feigned surprise. She refused to give up the child for free, claiming she had spent a lot on her upbringing, so the director asked her how much she wanted. The woman began calculating the alleged costs in a theatrical manner, noting that she had taken care of the child since she was very small. Then she asked for an exorbitant amount of 10,000 gold pieces, which shocked the director due to the magnitude and absurdity of the sum. Ivy felt anxious and whispered to the director that she was fine, trying to dissuade her from going through with it. But the director, with determination and insistence, ignored the girl's words and announced that she would pay the required amount. She then confirmed her decision that she would take the child with her no matter the cost. The director turned toward Ivy sitting on the ground and invited her to go with her, promising that everything would be fine from that moment on. Then she embraced her tenderly, comforting her that she had suffered a lot, and the child found in that embrace a security she had long missed. Thus, Ivy moved to live in the director's shelter, where where she was able to attend school in exchange for performing cleaning duties instead of paying tuition fees. She remembers how her new life was full of happy moments, like leaving every morning and waving energetically to the director. One day, she stopped suddenly upon hearing a quarrel between two children, as one was demanding food from the other, accusing him of eating 2 potatoes last time. The discussion between the two children intensified because of hunger, as one insisted that the food portion was only 1 piece per person. Ivy approached them calmly and asked if they wanted the piece of bread she had. With an innocent smile, she told them she wasn't hungry. The two children rejoiced at her offer and accepted it immediately, asking her not to take back her decision. Ivy realized that life was not difficult thanks to the director's kindness, but she also knew that the director carried many worries because of the many children she cared for. So she decided to endure her hunger for a bit after picking some wild berries, wishing in her heart that she could help in some way. One day, she discovered an announcement for the admission of new students to the Imperial Academy for the Gifted. The announcement was an imperial decree accepting students into advanced schools nationwide, but what caught her attention was a specific line stating that the academy provides food, clothing, and housing for all its students. Ivy realized this was her chance. If only one child left, though, shelter, it would ease the burden on the director. Therefore, she went to apply for admission, driven by the hope of earning a lot of money and helping the shelter after her graduation. But she knew that if she told the director her true motives, she would worry about her. Therefore, she presented the application to the director enthusiastically, expressing her strong desire to go to the academy and study hard, and asked for her permission. That night, after submitting her application, Ivy made a secret wish for the first time in her life, praying to her parents to help her pass the entrance exam. She realized that just thinking about them usually caused a lump in her throat, so she avoided it. But her strong desire for acceptance made her remember them repeatedly. She did not know if they were alive or not, and sometimes wondered if they had abandoned her because they did not need her. Despite all these painful thoughts, she longed to see them even once. The events returned to the present time as the carriage finally reached the academy entrance, which was teeming with people. Ivy and the director got out of the carriage, and they were amazed by the massive crowd, until it seemed as if all the inhabitants of the empire had gathered in that place. A man with an official appearance stepped forward and asked everyone for attention. He then announced that all applicants to the academy must enter now, and that parents are prohibited from accompanying their children inside. He repeated his words sternly, emphasizing that students must enter alone, or they would not be accepted. This decision sparked a wave of crying among the children who clung to their parents, refusing to go and expressing their fear. The director stood watching the scene with emotion, realizing that this was the first time most of these children were separated from their families. Then, her thoughts turned toward Ivy, expecting her to be in the same state. But contrary to her expectations, Ivy stepped forward steadily and told the director that she would enter now, thanking her for bringing her this far. The director was touched by Ivy's courage, thinking that anyone's heart would be shaken by seeing the other children's crying. But Ivy, although she was likely the youngest of them all, showed remarkable courage. The child tried to reassure the director, asking her not to worry too much, and promised her that she would study hard at the academy. She also promised she would make sure to eat her food well. The director couldn't help herself, so she turned her face away to hide her tears, whispering to herself how ridiculous it was for her to cry while Ivy was holding it together. Ivy noticed the director's tears and called her in surprise. The director returned and hugged Ivy warmly, telling her that they would always think of her even if they were far away. She asked her to contact them immediately if anything became difficult for her, promising they would come to get her right away. Ivy smiled a bright smile and replied in agreement. With the announcement of the academy gates closing soon, everyone prepared for the final farewell. The director urged Ivy to hurry and take care of herself, and the child promised she would send letters often as she headed toward the entrance. The director watched her as she walked away, praying in secret that Ivy could live well at the academy. Her last wish for her was to grow up to be a child capable of crying and expressing her feelings freely. From a nearby balcony, an elderly man and a young girl were watching the scene. The girl commented that seeing such a large number of children really made her feel that the academy had finally reopened, and the man replied laughing that he expected the place to be noisy every day from now on. Ivy caught the elderly man's attention, and he wondered about the identity of that small child, noting that the academy only accepts children from age 7 and up. Then he soon realized her identity and knew she was the child Ivy Alden. The scene shifted to a previous meeting, where one official was objecting loudly to the admission of a student, wondering why an unqualified child was allowed to enter the academy. He claimed her grades were below the required level, and that by reaching 17, she had exceeded the age limit. Another man, who was present at the meeting, replied that this child's family had provided great service during the war. The old man resented in his heart the official's audacity to raise his voice before His Majesty the King. However, the old man thought to himself that as long as it concerned the academy, some leniency was okay. The academy was a private, educational institution directly affiliated with the Imperial Palace, dedicated to children with exceptional talents. Although it was forced to close 7 years ago due to the chaos of the Succession War, it began accepting students again this year as a declaration of the empire's full stability. But in reality, the nation had stabilized some time ago, and the academy remained closed because of the emperor's grief for Princess Evie. The empress whom his majesty loved so dearly, and the newborn princess were tragically killed during the Succession War. The princess, who died the moment she was born, left behind nothing but her name, Evie, and his majesty mourned deeply for the daughter he was not even able to see. When some saw the emperor's vacant looks whenever his eyes fell on young children, feudal ambitions began to creep into their souls. The nobles aspired for their children to catch the attention of the grieving emperor, hoping he would adopt one of them. For this reason, they all tried to register their children in the academy, but the emperor, aware of their intentions, repeatedly postponed its reopening. He did not grant permission for it until this year. In the midst of the Imperial Council meeting, one official angrily threw an application on the floor. Emperor Clovis Archean Herechia was sitting coldly, contemplating the scene with a rigid look. Then he called for the Prime Minister, the same old man who was watching the student's entry. The emperor ordered him to pick up the document that had fallen on the floor, and the man reluctantly complied. The Prime Minister handed the document to the emperor. The emperor asked him why this application was being ignored, and the official replied hesitantly that the application was submitted by someone who severely lacked qualifications. The emperor looked at the application and said he saw no obvious deficiency. The official protested that the applicant was from an orphanage. He continued his argument that this academy might determine who His Majesty would adopt, making social status a crucial matter. The emperor interrupted him sharply, asking who said he would choose an adopted child from the academy. He reminded them that the Imperial Academy was founded with the noble goal of discovering and nurturing gifted children. Then he scolded them for setting regulations that contradicted this principle with the aim of excluding qualified talents, and they offered their apology in fear. Then the emperor pointed out that a 7-year-old girl had passed the high school graduation exam of Elam City. He added that she did so with perfect marks in every subject, which struck the council members with amazement. The Prime Minister realized that high schools are usually intended for those aged 15 and above, and that a 7-year-old girl's success with perfect marks was unprecedented. Nevertheless, one minister argued that this alone was not enough, and another agreed with him, which aroused the Prime Minister's dissatisfaction with the stereotypical aristocratic mindset. But he admitted to himself that their reaction was not entirely unreasonable, as this academy was no different from a miniature noble society. The maximum admission this year is only 500 students, a low number compared to 2,000 students before the war, given that it is the first year of reopening. With every seat being important, competition intensified more than ever, making the ministers strongly oppose the admission of someone from an orphanage. The emperor continued reading the application, and a semi-smile appeared on his face when he read that the applicant's hobby was cleaning. Then he placed the document on the table firmly and issued his order to approve the admission of this child. The ministers were shocked and stunned by his sudden decision. The emperor stood up to leave, leaving them with the task of settling the rest of the matters. Before leaving, he summoned the Prime Minister. He tasked him with supervising the registration of this child and ensuring that no one is rejected because of their social status, and the Prime Minister expressed his understanding. As soon as the emperor left, the ministers gathered around the Prime Minister, asking anxiously what His Majesty had said and if he had mentioned anything about adoption. The Prime Minister reassured them that the emperor only ordered the management of all students' affairs on an equal footing, nothing more. He added that he didn't even ask for the child's name, then invited them to continue the meeting, and they breathed a sigh of relief. Later, while the Prime Minister was alone, he reread the application, remembering another minister's insistence on choosing a specific child from his family, then sighed at this political mess, and finally read the name, Ivy Alden. After Ivy crossed the academy gates, she was greeted by a young woman who introduced herself as Melody and told her she would guide her to the dormitory. Ivy welcomed her enthusiastically and asked her to take care of her, which impressed Melody, who found her a sweet child. As they walked, Melody asked if her journey from Elam City was exhausting, and Ivy denied it. Rather, she added with a wide smile that the journey was fun, especially since it was her first time traveling to the capital. Melody was impressed by the child's innocence and said that must have made the journey more exciting. Then she gave her the academy guide, explaining that inside was a map of the buildings. She warned her that the academy includes many buildings and classrooms that change according to the subject, which might make navigation difficult at first, and advised her to ask staff when needed. Ivy took the book and began browsing it with intense focus. Melody smiled at the child's seriousness in studying just a guide and told her to take her time reading it, given there are many rules in it as well. But Ivy closed the guide and returned it to Melody, declaring confidently that she had memorized everything in it, leaving Melody in a state of shock. She asked her in amazement if she had really memorized all that, and Ivy confirmed it. Shock took hold of Melody, for that was an amazing talent even by the standards of Academy students. She told Ivy confusedly that she didn't need to return the book, as all new students get a copy of it. Happiness overwhelmed Ivy upon hearing that, for this was the first time she owned a book of her own. Melody laughed and told her she would have a problem if one book excited her this much, because she would receive many other things. Ivy wondered curiously what was coming, so Melody reminded her of the notice she received after her success and asked her if she remembered the first sentence in it. Ivy immediately remembered that the Academy would provide all necessities during her stay. When they reached the dormitory room, Ivy's eyes widened in fascination at its beauty and spaciousness. She wondered if this was really the room she would stay in, and Melody confirmed it, noting that it was a beautiful room overlooking the garden. Ivy jumped with joy, admiring the huge desk and the large bed, and Melody expressed her pleasure at her liking the room. Then she informed her that her roommate would arrive soon in the opposite room and warned her of the need to get along with her. She explained that her school uniform would be delivered the next day, and that she should head to the dining hall at dinner time. Ivy thanked her for the guidance. Happiness flooded Ivy's heart, for life at the Academy exceeded all her expectations, with her spacious room and the first book she ever owned. As she was going down the stairs, her excitement increased as she imagined that dinner must also be delicious. Soon she spotted what seemed to be the dining hall where students were heading. But on her way, a boy with an aristocratic appearance noticed her, looked at her with disdain, and wondered to himself why a commoner with a beggar's appearance was in this place. He felt resentful, believing that if it weren't for the acceptance of her kind, his brother would have been able to enter the Academy. He clenched his hand in anger, thinking of these scum who don't know their place. Then he decided with a wicked smile that he would personally help her realize her true place. He approached her, saying in a condescending tone that this place is not for beggars like her. The boy pushed Ivy hard, causing her to lose her balance and fall backward. While she was expecting a painful impact on the ground, she found herself falling on something soft, and wondered in confusion how she was not in pain. She opened her eyes to discover what happened. She heard a calm voice asking her if she was okay. She raised her head to find herself in the arms of another boy, a boy with black hair and clear blue eyes. She wondered about his identity. The boy held her gently and asked again if she was okay. Ivy was dazzled by the beauty of his blue eyes, which she compared to the jewels she had seen in books. They were so beautiful that she felt as if she was being pulled inside them. At that moment, a third boy with red hair arrived and asked anxiously if Ivy was okay. Ivy regained consciousness and replied affirmatively, then turned toward the boy who saved her, and whispered to herself how someone could be so rude to someone they just met. The bullying boy turned toward them and asked them angrily about their identity and who they thought they were. The arrival of the two young men caused a stir among the students present, who began whispering in amazement, wondering if it was really them. This was the first time many had seen them in person, and whispers spread about their handsomeness and the fact that they joined the Academy this year. One identified them as Lord Arcel and Lord Ruska, which struck the bullying boy with shock. He realized in fear that they belonged to the famous families of Viscount Ragself and the Duchy of Kalen. He stammered and apologized profusely. Then he ran away quickly, and Lord Ruska shouted after him mockingly that he was running. Then he threatened that he had memorized his face. Lord Arcel turned to Ivy and advised her to tell him if she was subjected to bullying again and to report it to the teacher, so Ivy thanked him gratefully. But soon a group of girls gathered around them who wanted to greet Lord Arcel and invite him to have a meal with them. Another girl joined the noisy crowd, expressing her desire to eat with them as well. Due to the crowding, Ivy found herself pushed aside and was scolded by the girls who described her as small and ordered her to get out of the way. Ivy felt sorry that she didn't get a chance to thank them properly. She wondered if they were really such important people for all this crowd to gather around them, and realized they were indeed wonderful people. So she decided to withdraw from the crowd, hoping she would have another chance to greet them later. From a distance, Lord Arcel was watching her as she walked away, thinking that she seemed younger than he expected and that he had wanted to talk to her. He knew she was from the Ilum Orphanage and that she got a full score in the entrance exam, just like him. That girl, Ivy Alden, was the youngest student ever accepted into the Academy for the Gifted. In the dining hall, Lord Arcel and Lord Ruska finally succeeded in finding a table and sitting down to eat their food in peace. But their calm did not last long, as another student approached them and asked if they could sit with them. Arcel replied coldly that they would like to eat in peace, so the student apologized and withdrew. Ruska scolded his friend Arcel for his harshness, noting that the student must have summoned a lot of courage to approach them. Arcel replied that his friend should have replied to the student instead of him, but Ruska ignored him and began eating his food. Ruska apologized coldly, saying he was hungry. Meanwhile, Arcel spotted Ivy looking for a place to sit and heard her asking some students if she could sit with them, but they rudely refused, wondering why commoners don't sit with their own kind. Ivy continued her search, but whenever she approached an empty seat, she was rejected on the pretext that the seat was reserved. Ivy's eyes met Arcel's from a distance. Ruska noticed she was heading toward them. Ivy reached their table and thanked them again for helping her earlier, explaining that she didn't get a chance to thank them properly. Arcel replied that he was just happy she wasn't hurt. Then she gathered her courage and asked them if she could sit with them. Before Arcel could agree, Ruska interrupted him with a smile, apologizing and explaining that it wouldn't work. He added that his friend likes to eat in silence and suggested they eat together another time, so Ivy understood and withdrew quietly. Ruska felt satisfied with himself, believing he offered a polite rejection on behalf of his friend. But Arcel looked at him coldly and told him he was useless, then stood up carrying his food tray. Ruska seethed with anger, complaining that his friend grumbles even when he does him a favor. As for Ivy, she decided to take a sandwich and eat it outside, thinking it was better to come to the cafeteria very early or very late from now on. While looking for a quiet place, she remembered the beautiful garden she saw from her room window and decided to go there. On her way, a sweet scent of flowers led her. She wondered if there was a flower field nearby. She remembered from the map that the Imperial Palace was located behind this forest, and imagined that the flower field maintained by the palace must be beautiful. Since there was still time before dark, she thought she could return before the curfew. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she would get into trouble if caught, but decided to take a quick look. She crawled through the thick bushes to reach the source of the scent. When she came out on the other side, she breathed a sigh of relief, but she was surprised to find that the place was not a flower field, but a cemetery. Ivy was surprised. The Academy guide did not mention a cemetery in this forest. She realized that the sweet scent was coming from the flowers surrounding the graves, and felt that this place might get her into big trouble if she was caught in it, so she decided to return. But before leaving, a tombstone caught her eye that seemed like it hadn't been cleaned in a long time. Without awareness, she found herself kneeling and starting to clean the tombstone with her hand, then suddenly realized what she had done automatically. Ivy remembered that she had acquired this cleaning habit from middle school, where she cleaned classrooms in exchange for her tuition fees. After she finished cleaning, she decided she should return now, but hesitated for a moment. Meanwhile, another person was approaching the cemetery, wondering if there was someone inside. The Emperor appeared and wondered about the identity of the intruder. When he arrived, he found that Ivy had fallen asleep next to the tombstone, after making a flower wreath and was holding it. The image of sleeping Ivy faded to show an old memory of the Emperor wondering angrily why his wife and daughter could not be buried in the imperial cemeteries. One of his advisors replied that with all due respect, their names could not be included in the imperial family register without receiving the previous emperor's sanctification. Consequently, they lacked the necessary qualification to be buried there. The emperor mocked this talk, saying they knew well the reason his wife did not receive the late emperor's sanctification. The advisor emphasized that it was because of her refusal of the marriage the previous emperor arranged for her, but regardless of the reason, she is considered a stranger to the family. The description stranger sparked the anger of the emperor, who said coldly that the advisor's talk had given him a good idea. He announced that his wife and daughter did not need to travel far to the imperial cemeteries. Rather, he would keep them by his side. He suggested that a location within the forest in the imperial palace would be sufficient, which shocked the advisors. One of them protested that placing graves inside the imperial palace was absurd and had no historical precedent. The emperor silenced them with a strong blow to the table with his sword. He threatened them that from that moment on, anyone who raised their voice would be considered defying the emperor's order, and that he would personally expel them from the palace. The events returned to the present, where the same emperor was walking toward the cemetery, thinking that he hadn't visited it for a while and that fallen leaves must have accumulated. He intended to start cleaning the tombstone as soon as he arrived, but he was surprised when he felt the presence of someone else there. When he arrived, he found a child sleeping next to the grave and wondered angrily about her audacity, but his anger faded when he saw the innocence of the sleeping child holding the flower wreath. Ivy woke up at the sound of his presence. The emperor asked her sharply how she entered here and if she knew where she was. Ivy stood up terrified, realizing she had broken the curfew. She asked him anxiously about the time, and he told her it was about 6 o'clock. She breathed a sigh of relief because she was not late yet. Then she turned to him and asked him innocently about his identity, addressing him as Sir, which aroused the resentment of the emperor, who felt a desire to reply to her. The emperor realized she did not know his identity at all. She asked him if he was a professor at the academy, which sparked his surprise. The emperor decided to go along with her assumption, so he replied that he was a professor at the academy named Sean Loyne, which surprised Ivy. Ivy introduced herself happily, saying her name was Ivy Alden, and she joined the academy that day. While she was speaking, the emperor went back in his memory to the past, remembering a conversation with his late wife. She had told him she believed their child, if born, would have hair the color of his hair. She added that she would have eyes resembling hers, but he replied that he preferred them to resemble her more. He told her he had never seen a color more beautiful than her hair color in his life. His wife replied that she knew that, and that their child would be born with blonde hair and green eyes. She added that, She would be a beautiful little girl. Ivy's innocent face brought him back to reality, and he wondered to himself if his daughter Evie had grown up safely. Would she have looked like this child, with hair resembling his hair and green eyes resembling his wife's eyes? But he soon brushed this idea from his head, describing it as a futile idea. For that was a child he buried with his own hands, along with Lillian. The Emperor was surprised by the presence of a student from the academy in this remote place inside the Imperial Palace. He asked her why she came here and if she knew the nature of this place. Ivy replied confusedly that the scent of flowers was what led her here. Then she apologized and asked if this was a place she was not supposed to enter. The Emperor looked at her silently, thinking that a child wandering alone like this is not always a good idea, especially inside the Imperial Palace. Ivy thanked him and said she would remember his advice. For a moment, she felt that his touch was gentle, like the touch of a kind father. Then she heard a bell ringing, announcing some appointment, and realized she was late. He asked her if she could return to the academy alone and offered to take her. Ivy thanked him and told him she could return from the way she came. When she started crawling back through the bushes, he wondered in surprise if that was her way. Before she disappeared completely, she called him and asked him to remember her name, which is Ivy Alden. The Emperor remained standing, watching her as she left. He admitted to himself that he didn't even find time to get angry, and that he was still weak before children of this age. Then he sat next to the grave, thinking that if Evie were still alive, she would be Ivy's age now. Then he repeated the name Ivy Alden and noticed something Ivy left behind on the ground. He picked up a dirty handkerchief. Meanwhile, Ivy was panting after barely arriving just in time. When Ivy returned to the dormitory, one of the employees noticed she looked like she had run all the way and advised her to try to arrive early starting from tomorrow. Ivy felt relieved because she didn't receive a scolding. While she was looking in her bag, she suddenly realized she had lost something. She had left her handkerchief behind, and that was the first thing given to her that day. But her sadness turned into hope. She realized that losing the handkerchief might give her a chance to see Professor Sean again. She decided she would ask one of the staff about his office the next day. But when she reached her room, she was surprised by the presence of a group of girls gathering in the room. She heard them whispering that Irene's roommate had arrived and that she seemed very small. Ivy was surprised, as she knew this was her room. One of the girls approached her and asked about her identity, and when she knew she was Ivy Alden from Ilam City, she realized she was the girl admitted from the orphanage. The other girls began making insulting comments, denouncing the Academy's acceptance of a girl from the commoners, and making mocking remarks about her simple clothes. Ivy admitted to herself that her clothes looked a bit wrinkled after entering the forest. At that moment, a girl with silver hair and purple eyes appeared. She was the most beautiful person Ivy had seen in her life. One of the girls whispered to Irene that something was wrong, and that she thought her roommate would be at least of the rank of Count. Irene silenced them with one word, then stepped toward Ivy. She looked at her with disdain and described her as pathetic. She added that everything about her, from her thin body to her hair and skin, seems in a state of chaos. Then she mockingly asked her if the orphanage she lived in starved its children. This comment sparked the anger of Ivy, who denied it firmly. She didn't care what others thought of her, but insulting the director was something she could never forgive. She defended her director passionately, describing her as the kindest and most wonderful person in the world. Her reaction aroused the ire of the other girls. One of them scolded her for her shouting, saying this is why commoners are a lost cause. Then they demanded she apologize to Lady Irene immediately. Irene felt suffocated by the presence of such a large number of people and said she needed to go out for some air. The other girls hurried to offer their services to guide her. They began talking about how vast the academy is and the presence of 5 cafeterias in it. Ivy felt a sudden pain as one of them pushed her away. Then Irene suddenly stopped and looked at her. Ivy was surprised by Irene's sudden look. The next morning, Ivy woke up early and put on her new school uniform with overwhelming joy. The uniform was very beautiful, and she felt as if she were in a dream while wearing it. She looked at the clock and realized it was time to go. Noticing that her roommate, Lady Irene, had not woken up yet, she wondered if she was still asleep. Ivy remembered Irene's strange look from the previous night, but she felt deep down that she did not seem like a bad person. She decided to check if she was awake and to apologize to her for raising her voice the previous day if the opportunity arose. Just as she was about to knock on Irene's room door, she was startled by a violent knocking on her own room door. When the door opened, she wondered who the caller was, only to find the 2 girls who had been bothering her the previous night. They rudely asked her why she was there and if she was waiting for Lady Irene. Ivy tried to explain that she didn't mean that, but they didn't believe her. One of them warned her against making the mistake of speaking rudely again, emphasizing that Lady Irene was not someone her kind was supposed to speak to, as she was a noble among nobles. Then they asked her to leave, saying they would take care of Lady Irene themselves. The student pushed Ivy out of the room and slammed the door violently behind her. Ivy concluded that Irene already had many friends. Nevertheless, she hoped she could greet her properly someday. Inside, the 2 girls were talking about Ivy, asserting that she had been waiting for Lady Irene, and that the rumors about roommates being assigned randomly must be true. At that moment, Irene came out of her room and the 2 girls greeted her. enthusiastically. Irene returned the greeting calmly, and one of the girls asked if she had any difficulty getting ready on her first day. One of them suggested to Irene that she take her commoner roommate as her maid, as some other young ladies do, but the other objected, saying that the girl was too ill-behaved for such a role, and that it would be a relief if she weren't in their way. She proudly told Irene that they had kicked her out after she had been loitering around. Irene calmly asked if they had really kicked her out, and the girl confirmed it, saying she didn't know her place. She added that she had scolded her severely and that she wouldn't bother her again if she had any sense. Irene's face darkened, and she whispered to herself that if it weren't for her promise to her sister, she would have ended these matters seriously. One of the girls asked in surprise what she had just said. Irene ignored her question and told them to head downstairs. The two girls felt confused, wondering if they had done something wrong. Outside, the teacher was checking the students' attendance before starting a tour of the Imperial Palace. She warned the students to stay close to their friends so they wouldn't fall behind, while small groups were forming, excited for the upcoming tour. As Ivy stood alone among the students, whispering began to circulate around her, as some recognized her as the girl about whom rumors had spread the previous day. Ivy felt the strangeness in the atmosphere surrounding her. Suddenly, a girl approached her and introduced herself as Lemura Yesel. She kindly asked if she minded her joining her. Ivy was very happy because she had finally found a friend and agreed immediately. Introducing herself as Ivy Alden, Lemura told her she knew her and that she was the girl from the orphanage. Lemura explained that she understood how difficult it was for her to be surrounded by nobles, because she too was from a commoner background. She proudly added that she might not look like it. Ivy expressed her surprise, saying she already felt that, and was happy that Lemura had initiated the conversation first. Lemura felt angry at that response, but laughed to soften her reaction, and then told her there was something she had been dying to ask her. She asked if she had been secretly adopted by a great noble family, or perhaps she was the illegitimate daughter of a high-ranking figure, justifying her question by saying that her admission to the academy didn't seem logical otherwise. Lemura asked Ivy not to pretend to be innocent, claiming she knew everything. She asked her how she managed to get the Emperor to choose her himself. Ivy was shocked by this claim and dismissed it as being true. She had never visited the capital. Before joining the academy, she didn't even know what the Emperor looked like, and she had never been adopted by any noble family. Lemura seemed skeptical and said that what she knew was that the decision was definitely so. At that moment, silence fell and Arcel and Luska appeared, causing a stir among the students. The two girls noticed the large crowd gathered around the two young men, and Lemura wondered if it would be this chaotic every day, while Ivy noticed their great popularity, wondering if it was because of their handsomeness. Lemura was surprised that Ivy didn't know them, so Ivy replied that she had met them for the first time the previous day. Lemura enthusiastically told her that they were the candidates everyone expected to become the Emperor's adopted sons. She explained that Arcel is the third son of the Duke of Kalin, a genius in all fields since his childhood, and often meets the Emperor. As for Luska, he is the fourth son of the Marquis of Ragself, and although he may be less academically superior than Arcel, his physical abilities are outstanding, and he is expected to have a brilliant future as a knight. Lemura added that whichever of them becomes a prince is supposed to marry the daughter of the wealthy Terrence family in the south, but things might change. She explained that this is why everyone is flocking to them, as many hope to win this position. Then she asked Ivy if she understood the matter now, and Ivy replied in the affirmative, confirming that she at least knew they were good people, as she had already spoken with them a few times. Lemura was surprised by that, and said that speaking to them is not easy. And while she was speaking, Ivy pointed out that they were coming in their direction. Ivy stepped forward and greeted Arcel. Lemura was surprised how Ivy dared to speak to him alone, then apologized in confusion. Arcel returned the greeting calmly, much to Lemura's surprise, while Ivy praised his elegant appearance in the school uniform. He thanked her and returned the compliment. Then she asked him about Luska's absence, and he replied indifferently that he had set off like a fool and pointed to a distant place. Ivy said she would greet him properly next time. Lemura signaled to Ivy enthusiastically, asking her to introduce her to him quickly. Ivy agreed and introduced Lemura to Lord Arcel, but Arcel apologized that he was a little tired. Then he excused himself to head to the art gallery first and left. Ivy felt disappointed, saying it was a pity she couldn't introduce her, as Lord Arcel already seemed tired. Lemura reassured her that it was fine, and that they would continue to see each other at the academy, which meant there would be another opportunity. Ivy agreed, and suggested to Lemura that they follow the guide again. Lemura apologized, saying she had to go back to her friends now. She waved goodbye to her. When Lemura returned to her friends, they asked her why she was late. Curiously, they asked her what Ivy had said, and if it was true that the Emperor had chosen her personally. Lemura replied hesitantly that the matter didn't seem entirely certain, but rather ambiguous. Her friends were surprised by that. They accused her of being the one who told them that and spread the rumor, and now she says the matter is uncertain. Lemura defended herself, saying that Ivy did not clearly admit it, but she added that she believed Ivy was hiding the matter for the time being, citing her friendly way of speaking with Lord Arcel earlier. She concluded that if the Emperor had chosen her, it was natural that she would be acquainted with Arcel. Her friends were convinced by her words, believing that something was indeed happening. One of the girls apologized to Lemura for doubting her, as she had almost thought she was lying. Lemura laughed and said she would never do that. Then she admitted that she understood why they doubted her, and that's why she thought of a way to get a definitive answer. She told them that she would make sure of the matter herself later. In the meantime, the tour had begun, and the guide explained that the building in front of them was the main hall of the Imperial Palace, and that 5 other palaces were connected to it, making it the largest and most magnificent complex on the continent. The students were fascinated by the beauty of the palace up close, but Ivy couldn't see well because of her short stature. One of the students noticed dark marks on the palace walls and wondered about their nature. The guide, who was actually Melody, explained that those marks were remnants of the Succession War. One of the students wondered why the traces of war remained on the Imperial Palace while the capital streets had already been repaired. The guide praised her question and explained that this was due to His Majesty the Emperor's desire to prioritize repairing the damage caused to the people. For this reason, the palace's repair budget was allocated to public facilities first. Ivy felt that this story sounded somewhat familiar. She remembered the times when the orphanage director would return with a bright smile, announcing that His Majesty had ordered more money to be allocated to the orphanage, and that thanks to this, they would have plenty of food that winter. The guide continued the tour, noting that there were still many places to visit. Ivy looked at the majestic palace, realizing that if it weren't for His Majesty the Emperor, the orphanage would have been the last to receive help. She bowed her head in silent gratitude, thanking him for enabling them to survive the winter. Suddenly, she realized something and wondered if that person she met was... The scene shifts to a meeting room where a heated discussion was taking place about imposing higher taxes on the upper class, with some opposing it for fear of the nobles' reaction. The emperor interrupted their discussion sharply, criticizing their overly idealistic position. He scolded them for shouting at each other every day instead of being role models as officials in the imperial palace. He asked them if they lacked the idea of how to conduct a proper discussion. Then he announced that the meeting would resume in 10 minutes and left the room. The emperor stood by the window, breathing a sigh of relief. Suddenly, he heard a voice calling him Professor Sean, and he realized it was Ivy Alden. Ivy greeted him enthusiastically. The emperor remembered that day was the Academy Tour Day. He noticed that she looked much smaller than the rest of the students, and wondered if she would be able to keep up with the tour. Then he wished to himself that the other students were not there, and that she had come alone. He would have pretended to be a professor and taken her on a tour himself. He looked at his hand, remembering something, then waved to her. His thoughts were interrupted by the voice of one of the assistants, who asked him in surprise what he was doing. The emperor coldly replied that there was an insect here, which left the assistant stunned. Then he ordered the prime minister to ensure the palace was well maintained so that there were no insects. The emperor returned to the meeting. After the atmosphere had calmed down, one of the advisors suggested applying the taxes in stages to avoid a backlash, but he noted that some nobles would try to exploit the farmers, necessitating a system to protect them. The emperor thought to himself that his excuse was strange, and that he had made an uncharacteristic mistake in front of his subordinates. When one of the advisors offered him another plan, the prime minister rejected it, thinking it wasn't quite right. But he quickly backed down, claiming it seemed like a good way after thinking carefully, which confused the advisors. In the meantime, the guide continued the tour, explaining that they had reached the main hall of the Central Palace, which houses the emperor's office and the largest banquet hall. During the tour inside the Imperial Palace, the students met 2 guards from the Imperial Guard. The 2 guards introduced themselves, expressing their happiness at meeting the promising academy students. One of them happily explained that he also got a chance to see his nephew after a long time, and headed toward him tenderly. The guard asked his nephew about his life at the academy and offered him help at any time, while the students were whispering about the splendor of the Imperial Guard armor and about their relatives who work in the palace. Ivy noticed that everyone seemed to have many acquaintances in the palace and thought that life at the academy would be more fun if she knew people nearby. From a distance, Lemura and her friends were watching the scene, exchanging cynical comments of thanks and encouragement. Lemura looked on with disdain, commenting that the whole scene was a show and that there was no reason to wear full armor inside the palace anyway. But she admitted that this kind of showing off is very effective and wished she had acquaintances too. One of her friends reminded her of what she had said earlier about confirming the rumor and asked her about her plan. Lemura remembered the matter. Her friend whispered to her that there were many eyes watching them now, so things must go well, and urged her to hurry. Lemura grumbled about her friend's instigation, but thought the timing was indeed perfect. She planned to put Ivy in an embarrassing position, for even if the rumor wasn't true, and regardless of Ivy's answer, she would appear a liar in front of everyone. Lemura stepped toward Ivy and asked her in a pretentious way if she felt jealous of these things, adding that she didn't need to as long as the emperor himself supported her. Ivy was surprised by her words, so Lemura asked her in feigned surprise if she would deny that she herself had said earlier that His Majesty had chosen her personally. She added that she felt very jealous when she heard that and wondered if she was lying, suggesting she did so because she had nothing to boast about being from an orphanage. Ivy protested, saying she had never said anything like that. At that moment, the guide interrupted them, asking for silence. But one of the guards stopped her. saying he believed there were some matters that needed clarification. Then he headed toward Ivy and said he understood her feeling jealous because of her young age, but daring to use His Majesty's name was something he, as an Imperial Knight, could not overlook. He demanded she tell the truth and apologize immediately, threatening to expel her from the academy, while Lemura watched the scene with a wicked smile, believing that things were going better than she expected. But Arcel suddenly intervened and said that Ivy was right. He announced in front of everyone that it was true that His Majesty the King had chosen Ivy Alden himself. He explained that the reason for this was that she was about to be rejected solely because of her low status, despite graduating first in her class, just like him. Then he directed his words to the guard, saying that his father, who is close to His Majesty, was the one who told him that himself, and asked him if he would claim that this was a lie too. The guard was shocked and apologized to Ivy for the misunderstanding. Then he left quickly, while his nephew felt embarrassed. Whispers began to spread among the students about the fact that Ivy was first in her class along with Lord Arcel. Lemura looked at the scene in a state of shock, realizing she had been right from the beginning. Then she heard a voice calling her name. Arcel confronted Lemura, saying he heard that Ivy did not spread the rumor herself, but rather did not even know of His Majesty's intervention. He asked her why she intentionally, being uninvolved in the matter, stirred up a misunderstanding in front of everyone. Lemura was confused and found nothing to say. She looked at her friends, who pretended to be ignorant, forgetting that they had been encouraging her enthusiastically moments ago. Lemura realized she had made a mistake and tried to apologize, saying she didn't mean for that to happen. But Arcel interrupted her and told her he didn't care about the reason, advising her to think a little before she acts. Then he left, leaving Lemura in confusion and embarrassment. Arcel thought to himself how he ended up helping Ivy again and wondered if she would come to thank him again. He looked at her to find her very happy. Ivy realized at that moment that what was said was true, and that His Majesty was indeed the one who chose her himself. She felt a great sense of relief, as she had been worried about being expelled on charges of mocking the imperial family, but now she could stay at the academy. But she didn't notice Lemura's hateful look. Lemura felt insulted, believing that everything went well for Ivy because of Lord Arcel's intervention. Lemura's friends noticed her condition and asked if she was okay. They apologized to her, but expressed their relief that she was right in the end. One of them wondered why Lord Arcel stood on Ivy's side, and the other concluded that they must be closer than they thought, especially since Arcel mentioned that they had exchanged greetings previously. The girls expressed their hatred for the idea of Ivy getting close to Lord Arcel, especially since she was just an orphan. Lemura smiled wickedly and said she had a great idea. At the end of the tour, the guide announced that their final destination was the History Hall of the Imperial Palace. She explained that much of the hall was currently under renovation, so many of the exhibits lacked descriptions, but she was certain they would have another chance to visit it in the future. She allowed them to wander freely, provided they gathered again in the front square shortly thereafter. Most of the students felt exhausted and decided to take a rest, uninterested in history. But one of the girls pointed out that the gallery of large imperial portraits was located nearby. This excited her friends, as they realized they would be able to see His Majesty the Emperor's portrait. The mention of the Emperor's portrait piqued Ivy's curiosity too. While the girls were celebrating the success of their plan to lure Ivy, Ivy remembered how the Emperor was practically her savior, from the orphanage to the Academy for the Gifted. She felt she must see his majestic presence with her own eyes. But when she reached the portrait's place, she found it covered, which disappointed her, as she never imagined that work on it was still ongoing. Ivy decided to check out the other exhibits first, since she had arrived here. She wandered through the hall, feeling happy she came even though the descriptions weren't there yet. A portrait of a girl her age caught her attention. She was as beautiful as a princess, and she wished she knew her name when she returned. Then she suddenly stopped in front of another portrait. It was a portrait of a lady with red hair and green eyes, and she was so beautiful that Ivy had never seen anyone this attractive in her life before. For a moment, she felt enchanted by her beauty. After a while, Ivy realized that the place had become very quiet and wondered if everyone had left without her. She hurried toward the exit, but she found the door tightly closed. Outside, the guide was asking everyone to gather. When the guide, Melody, noticed someone was missing, Irene stopped her, saying she couldn't find her roommate. Melody asked her about her identity, so Irene told her her name was Ivy Alden. She was 7 years old and described her appearance as having pale blonde hair and green eyes and being very small and cute. Melody replied that she knew her well. She asked her where she last saw her, and Irene replied that she wasn't quite sure because they weren't walking together. Melody realized the seriousness of the situation and said that if Ivy was still inside the main palace, this was a grave matter. So Irene asked her why. Melody explained that they would not be able to enter the main palace soon because of the arrival of an important figure. At that moment, the Minister of State, Prime Minister, arrived. The minister scolded the guide angrily, wondering how a child could get lost inside the imperial palace, so the guide apologized for her misjudgment. Then the minister asked what the child who was with the missing girl said, so Melody told him that Miss Ivy had been wandering alone the whole time. The minister's anger increased, and he wondered how no one knew where she was. Melody asked him anxiously if they had to wait until morning to find the child. The minister explained that 7 years ago, during the Succession War, tragic events occurred that hardly anyone is ignorant of. His Imperial Majesty lost everything in that conflict. Since then, and to ensure such a tragedy does not happen again, His Majesty has imposed a strict curfew within the palace grounds. For this reason, they cannot search the palace as they please, regardless of their positions, especially since they do not know the child's location. All they can do now is pray that Ivy remains well hidden from His Majesty's sight, because she will inevitably be executed if found. Melody decided she would join the search team with the Academy staff as soon as dawn broke, praying with all her heart that no harm would come to Ivy. Then she announced to the students that today's trip had ended and that everyone must return to the dormitory immediately. Trapped in the dark history hall, Ivy began knocking on the door and shouting for help. She wondered what happened, and if they closed the doors for the closing hour, but she was sure they must have noticed her inside. She tried to calm herself down, convincing herself that the guide must have realized her absence by now, and that all she had to do was believe and wait. With the onset of darkness, the portraits hanging on the walls began to look scary. This sparked Ivy's fear. She decided to move toward the faint moonlight. She found a slightly brighter place and sat there to wait. She tried not to look at the scary portraits, but she was surprised when she noticed that one of the portraits was not scary at all. She decided to wait calmly, confident that they would come to look for her. But the cold began to creep in. In the meantime, in the student dormitory, Luska was complaining about tiredness and asked Arcel if he had heard Ivy's news. Since Arcel returned early, Luska assumed he was not aware of her loss inside the Imperial Palace. Arcel asked Luska to tell him everything, so he told him that she lost her way just before the curfew, and wondered if she really didn't know how strict the Emperor was in applying the curfew. Arcel wondered if the staff had gone out to look for her. Luska reminded him that even the staff could not enter the palace at this time. They concluded that the search would not resume until the next morning. Arcel felt anxious, thinking that a small child trapped in the palace all night might leave a permanent psychological scar. Then he reminded Luska that they both carry special imperial permits. He suggested they go themselves to look for Ivy Alden. In the darkness of the palace, Luska was nervous, believing that looking for her alone was an impossible task. He tried to convince Arcel that the palace grounds were vast, and that the adults had not reached their decision to wait without reason. But Arcel insisted on searching for a little longer, suggesting she might be nearby. Suddenly, they heard a voice asking who they were, as they had passed the curfew time. Luska was confused, but Arcel advised him to stay calm and tell the truth. So Arcel introduced himself and Luska, explaining that they possessed special imperial permits, meaning their presence did not violate protocol. But the voice that replied to them was not a guard's, but a familiar voice. That said, he did not believe the permits he had granted them were intended to be used in this way. The two young men realized they were before His Majesty the Emperor. The Emperor scolded them, saying that regardless of their identity, they could not break the palace rules recklessly, and threatened to confiscate their permits if they repeated it again. So they apologized immediately. The Emperor sighed and said that as long as they realized their mistake, that was enough, expressing his confidence that they would not repeat the same mistake again. Then he asked them why they were here. Arcel explained that a student from the academy had gone missing in the palace today, and that he came to look for her, worried that she would remain trapped alone until tomorrow morning. And they told the Emperor that the missing student was Ivy Alden. The Emperor was surprised that Ivy had become missing in the palace. He asked them if they had any idea where she was, and Arcel replied in the negative, explaining that they were searching in the places they visited during the tour. The Emperor thought about the vast size of the palace, realizing that they couldn't search randomly, and that searching everywhere would take a long time. In addition, the biggest problem was that once the security magic was activated, most of the staff leave the palace, leaving very few people available to help. The Emperor ordered the two young men to return to the dormitory, but Arcel tried to object, explaining that Ivy Alden was one of the most difficult students in the academy and asked permission for them to search a little longer. The Emperor repeated his order to return firmly, so Arcel realized that convincing him was impossible. But before they left, the Emperor said there was no need to worry, and that he would summon Seraphina to find her. Seraphina Reedham was the palace sorceress, a miracle who never lost first place from her admission until her graduation from the academy. She was known as the most powerful sorceress alive, and currently serves as the head of the Academy for the Gifted, and is undoubtedly one of the Emperor's closest advisors. Arcel realized that summoning someone like her meant that the Emperor was planning to search the palace using magic, which is forbidden, and he knew that if the Emperor personally broke the rules, it might at worst lead to severe damage to trust in the royal family. Arcel wondered why the Emperor was willing to bear this burden for one child. Then the Emperor ordered Seraphina to be summoned to the Mana Stone warehouse. When Seraphina arrived, she asked in surprise why a palace-level tracking spell was requested. The Emperor told her that a child had gone missing, so Seraphina felt shocked. The Emperor explained that a student from the Academy for the Gifted went missing during the palace tour, and since they don't know exactly where she is, they must track her using magic. Seraphina was surprised by the use of a royal mana stone for one child, for if the courtiers knew that the Emperor himself broke the palace rules, they would not rest. and she wondered if there was something else she didn't know. But she soon brushed these thoughts away, seeing it as an opportunity that might work in her favor. When would she get another chance to see such a huge spell cast in the palace? She began searching for a mana stone that suited her wavelength, and when she found it, she announced that there would be no problem casting the spell across the entire palace. Seraphina hoped the spell would succeed from the first attempt, for inside the palace there are many disturbances that often interrupt the flow of magic. Seraphina added that it would have been much easier if Lillian was helping her as before. Then she suddenly realized she had made a slip of the tongue and felt afraid. The Emperor wondered coldly what she was talking about. Before she could answer, he warned her, saying it would be better for her to answer correctly, and that her being close to his wife did not mean he would go easy on her. Seraphina replied in confusion that Lillian was a bit unusual. She explained that she didn't know the reason, perhaps because the wavelength of her energy was similar to her own wavelength. But when Lillian was around, she felt the accuracy of her magic improve. It was as if the magic became more solid. She wondered to herself why she hadn't realized this important fact until now. Then she told the Emperor that Lillian asked her not to tell him that. She added that she wasn't sure why, but perhaps because she had been called a witch all her life. She wanted to hide the fact that she possessed unusual powers, and that she didn't fully understand how to use these powers herself. Seraphina tried to change the subject, saying she must return to the main palace quickly because she was worried about the child too. So the Emperor ordered her to go and get ready. Seraphina felt relieved that the situation ended without incident. In the meantime, Ivy was sitting alone in the dark, feeling cold and hungry. But she tried to strengthen her resolve, convincing herself that this was nothing compared to what she suffered at the inn. She remembered the harsh words of the innkeeper, who always reminded her that she avoided living as a beggar because they picked her up after she was abandoned in the forest. The woman was always asking her whom she should listen to, and Ivy would answer in fear that she should listen to the inn owners, so the woman would order her to go and clean the stable manure. She remembered how one of the customers felt sorry for her, but the woman would rudely silence him, asking him to pay the costs of her upbringing if he cared about her. The shovel was too heavy for her, and she knew that if she didn't finish her work, there would be no dinner that night. Once she fell on the animal manure and screamed in fear. When she returned, the woman scolded her because of the foul smell and ordered her to sleep in the barn and go the next day to clean herself. When she asked about her dinner, she threw a piece of bread on the ground for her. Ivy remembered that although most people felt sorry for those living in an orphanage, for her it was like heaven. She didn't have to work to exhaustion all day, and meals were served 3 times a day at set times. The food was not stale bread or watery porridge, but warm, well-cooked food. Ivy felt that her meeting with the director was truly good luck. Suddenly, she heard a strange sound and noticed a bright light creeping through the window. She wondered if it was a ghost and felt afraid as it approached. She had never seen anything like this before, but she heard a gentle voice telling her it was okay and that it was looking for her. She turned toward the portrait of the lady with red hair and felt as if she heard a voice. It was a gentle voice, speaking as if it were soothing her. Because of this voice, she felt that everything would be okay. At that moment, Seraphina was casting the spell and succeeded in finding Ivy's location. Seraphina informed the Emperor that Ivy was in the Imperial Palace History Hall, near the portrait room. Soon they arrived there and knocked on the door, calling out for Ivy Alden. The door opened to reveal Seraphina and the search team. Ivy stepped toward them shyly, asking if Seraphina was a faculty member and apologizing for missing the gathering time. Seraphina picked up the little girl in wonder, surprised by her tiny size. Then she placed her hand on her forehead, noticed she had a slight fever, and attributed it to the coldness of the place. She apologized to her if the flash of her magic had frightened her. Then she suggested that she think about becoming a sorceress because she felt a great compatibility between their wavelengths. At that moment, Ivy felt dizzy from the many questions, so the attendants called out to Seraphina, addressing her as Director. Seraphina explained that they had to return to the academy first, and then they could talk. Ivy was surprised that this young lady was the academy director. The academy booklet mentioned that the director was a very important figure, so she had assumed they would be much older. Seraphina carried Ivy in her arms, told the 2 young men to go back and get some rest, and said they would deal with the rest tomorrow. While she was carrying her, Seraphina noticed Ivy's strange look and thought she might be wondering how they found her so quickly. She concluded that Ivy might have Lillian's protection or something of the sort. From a distance, the Emperor watched them, feeling relieved to see Ivy appearing unharmed. When Seraphina and Ivy returned to the dormitory, Arcel and Luska were waiting for them. Luska expressed his relief for her safety. Arcel asked Seraphina if Ivy was okay, noticing the paleness of her face. Seraphina jokingly scolded them for waiting instead of going back, and Arcel replied that they were worried. Ivy was surprised to learn that Arcel and Luska were worried about her. Seraphina told Ivy that finding her was thanks to them. She explained that they entered the palace after curfew searching for her and almost collided with His Majesty. Seraphina suddenly became tense, realizing the Emperor had asked her to keep his intervention a secret. She then recovered with a laugh, claiming that the 2 young men happened to run into her while she was returning from an interview with His Majesty, and that she used a little magic to help them. Ivy thanked them all for their concern for her, but Arcel wanted to verify something. He asked, Ivy, how she ended up alone there and if someone had locked her in on purpose. Ivy thought of the girl's strange behavior that day, but she couldn't accuse anyone without proof and thought maybe it was her own fault because her mind wandered. Then she dismissed that and decided the reason was that she was so fascinated by the paintings that she lost track of time. Arcel asked her again if she suspected anything else, and she replied in the negative. Serafina interrupted Arcel's questions, saying that was enough. She noticed that Ivy's hand was slightly swollen, so she decided to treat it first. Using her magic, Serafina treated Ivy's swollen hand. Ivy thanked the director for everything she had done for her that day. Serafina assured her that the dormitory was nearby, and she could return on her own, and that the swelling would disappear within a few days. Ivy waved goodbye to the two young men. After Ivy left, Arcel asked Serafina if she truly believed Ivy was locked in by mistake, and she answered no. She announced her intention to start searching for the culprit the next morning because the incident could have escalated into something more serious, and severe punishment was the only option. Upon returning to her room, Ivy felt relieved and decided to take a bath and prepare for bed after a long and exhausting day, but she was surprised to find a sandwich and a glass of milk on her table. She wondered if the director had left them for her and felt overjoyed because she was hungry. While she was eating, she decided to thank her the next time she met her, unaware that her roommate Irene was watching her with a smile from behind the door. The next morning, Luska was complaining of tiredness, hinting that their sneaking into the palace in the middle of the night was the reason, to which Arcel replied that he was the one who insisted on playing after they returned. Luska grumbled that Arcel always had the last word. Arcel silenced him and whispered to him to lower his voice. Arcel noticed Limora and her friends sitting nearby, wondering what to do, believing that as long as Ivy returned safely, it was fine. But one of them expressed concern that Ivy would tell someone what happened, especially since they were the only ones who went to the portrait room, while the other justified their action by saying they were also deceived by Limora. Arcel surprised Limora's friends with a greeting, then approached them and asked if he could sit with them. They welcomed him enthusiastically. Arcel said he imagined everyone was shaken by the big commotion yesterday. He added that it would be good if the matter passed peacefully, but since the director had discovered it, he feared it would turn into a major case. His words raised their anxiety, and they wondered if that meant there might be disciplinary action that could go as far as expulsion. Arcel expressed his dissatisfaction with the idea of someone being expelled because of a commoner girl, and said that for this reason, he wanted to help as much as possible. Then he asked them to tell him anything they knew about what happened. He swore in the name of the Kalin family that he would protect them. One of the girls broke down and confessed that they had locked Ivy in the portrait room. She tried to justify their action by saying they didn't really mean to lock her in, but rather that Limora deceived them. She added that Limora said she would let her out immediately, and that she only intended to scare her for a moment. But things got out of control and they felt afraid. Arcel sighed after one of the girls admitted she had wanted to tell him the truth. Then he thanked her for her honesty. She begged him not to tell anyone what they had done. Arcel reassured her that he had promised in the name of his family to help them, but he added sharply that if they knew what they did was wrong and did not apologize to the person concerned, there would be nothing he could do about it, which terrified them. After Arcel left, Luska followed him and asked if he had discovered the identity of the culprit. Arcel replied yes, confirming it was the girl he suspected. Luska asked him what he planned to do now. Arcel answered him with another question, asking for his opinion. Then he said with a cold expression that he would return the favor nicely. Later, while Limora and her friends were sitting together, Arcel interrupted them and directed his speech toward Limora. He asked Limora if he could speak with her privately for a moment. His request surprised her friends, who wondered if they were close. Limora shyly agreed. When they went out, she asked him what he wanted to say. Arcel told her that one of the staff members said they were keeping something she had lost and offered to take her there himself. Limora was excited by the idea and asked him if it would bother him, and Arcel denied it, explaining that he was the one who initiated the offer and must take responsibility and drop her off. She happily agreed and left the matter to him. Limura wondered to herself what she could have lost, but she didn't pay much attention to it. She told Arcel that she doesn't usually lose her things and asked him if something like this had ever happened to him before. He answered her coldly, "Who knows?" Limura felt the strangeness of his cold response, but she soon convinced herself it was just her imagination. Then Arcel told her they had arrived. He opened the staff room door for her and asked her to enter. But as soon as she entered, she felt the place didn't look like a staff room. Arcel closed the door behind her, much to her panic. Limora began knocking on the door, begging Arcel to open it. Arcel asked her from behind the door if this situation seemed strangely familiar. Then he advised her to confess her mistake sincerely if she didn't want to remain trapped there. Limora denied that Ivy's disappearance had anything to do with her, claiming she actually tried to stop the others. Arcel realized she was lying until the end, so he decided it was useless and said goodbye. Limora screamed after him, begging him not to go, but he left. And she sat on the floor in shock, wondering if he had really left her. There was no one on her way here, so she realized she might be trapped forever. Fear began to creep into her as she sat alone in a dark and quiet place. She didn't want to be alone. Limora broke down and began screaming, confessing that she was wrong and that she was the one who asked them to lock Ivy in. she begged, crying, for someone to let her out. The door opened suddenly to find Ivy standing before her. Lemura wondered in confusion about Arcel's whereabouts. Lemura accused Ivy of doing all this. She accused her of pretending to be innocent and then using Arcel for revenge. She shouted in her face, saying that even if they were both commoners, they were on completely different levels. And she raised her hand in anger to slap her. But before she could finish, Serafina's hand stopped her firmly. Lemura was surprised to see the academy director. Lemura tried to defend herself, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but Serafina asked her how she explained what she had just confessed. Lemura remembered her confession to Arcel that she was the one who ordered Ivy to be locked in. Then she looked toward Ivy and began to cry. She then admitted, weeping, that she had done it and that she had lost her mind for a moment out of jealousy. She explained that she only intended to tease her a little and never imagined things would reach this point. Then she grabbed Ivy's hand, confessing her mistake and begging her to forgive her, promising never to do anything like this again. Lemura pleaded with Ivy to pardon her, but Ivy answered with a refusal. She explained that because of Lemura, she was locked in a cold and dark place for a long time, and if the director hadn't found her quickly, she would have suffered serious consequences. Serafina remembered that when she thought about it, she found it strange that Ivy, who was locked alone in a dark place, did not have any trace of tears on her face. For most children would have cried and called out for their parents, Ivy told Lemura that the director taught her that if you know something is wrong and still do nothing, it is no different than doing wrong yourself. She added that although Lemura knew what she was doing was wrong, she did nothing until the end. For this reason, Ivy announced that she would not forgive her, which left Lemura in shock. Then Serafina intervened, saying it was time to impose the punishment. Serafina told Lemura not to be afraid, for her punishment was simple. She must sincerely apologize to Ivy every day until Ivy forgives her. Lemura was shocked and asked what she meant by that. She rejected the punishment, saying she preferred to receive negative points or any other penalty. But Serafina told her there were no other options, and that her punishment would increase if she refused. Lemura found no escape but to run away. Serafina sighed, saying she had hoped the matter would end peacefully as Ivy wanted, but she never expected Lemura to run away just because she didn't want to apologize. Meanwhile, Arcel asked Ivy if she still hadn't changed her mind about forgiving the one who harmed her and keeping the matter a secret from the other children. Ivy confirmed that her feelings hadn't changed. She explained that this was the way the director always acted. The next day in the cafeteria, Ivy was the center of everyone's attention. Students were whispering about her being the child who was lost the day before, and that the Imperial Palace was in a state of chaos because of her. Ivy felt uncomfortable from all these looks. She decided to take her food and move to a quiet corner. While she was taking a sandwich, Lemura suddenly appeared before her. Ivy wondered if she had come to apologize, but Lemura took a sandwich and left without saying a word. Ivy felt disappointed, but thought she might still need some time, remembering that the children in the shelter also took time before they apologized. While she was looking for a place to sit and eat her food, a girl asked if she could sit with her. Ivy agreed immediately, and was shocked when she recognized her. She realized that this girl was her roommate, Irene. Ivy was surprised by her presence and asked her if it was okay not to eat with her friends. Irene replied that she wanted to talk to her today because they hadn't spent much time together despite being roommates. Ivy strongly denied that it was uncomfortable for her, and apologized for raising her voice unintentionally, explaining that she was so happy that she couldn't help herself. Irene told her she understood and asked her to eat first because she looked hungry. Irene thought to herself how cute Ivy was. On the day of admission, Irene's friends were wondering about the identity of her roommate, expecting she would be at least of the same status. Irene entered her room and was impressed by it. Then she thought the garden might be better seen from the next room. When she entered the other room, she saw a small uniform hanging. The small uniform greatly impressed her. The southern region of the empire, where Irene was born and raised, was known for its inhabitants being slightly larger than the inhabitants of other regions. People in the southern region of the empire, where Irene was born and raised, were much larger than the inhabitants of other regions. For this reason, Irene, although only 10 years old, looked more mature than her peers. Southerners, upon seeing small children, tended to spoil them excessively. Irene herself, as the youngest in her family, was always beloved, but perhaps because of this excessive spoiling, she was a troublemaker, to the point that her father once scolded her for sending Roman's second son to the hospital again. Her sister asked why she did it, after hearing that she punched his face and kicked him between his legs. Irene justified her action by saying the boy was the one who kicked her first, then lifted her skirt, so she made sure he wouldn't dream of doing that again. This confession sparked the anger of her father and sister. Her father called for her older sister, Ines, and explained to her that if they beat him hard enough that he wouldn't dare show his face again, and made sure he wouldn't work properly either, the problem would be solved. Irene was shocked by the thinking of her father and sister. Her father noticed she was causing more problems than usual lately, making everyone fear her. After discussing the matter as a family, they decided she needed a new environment. He gave her an acceptance letter from the academy. Her sister told her she was the one who submitted the application for her, which angered Irene and made her feel betrayed. Her sister explained that she might feel she lacks nothing, but she needs friends, and a network of relationships in the capital. Her sister replied that friends are relationships, and entering the academy would kill two birds with one stone. Her sister reminded her that she was now 10 years old and must start acting like a member of the Terrence family. This meant one must fulfill their role for the family. For the family that gathered enormous wealth and power through trade, its children must follow a precisely calculated path that suits their abilities and status. Her father reminded her that she hated linking her name with the crown princess rumors, and that this was a good opportunity to clear those rumors herself. Rumors had spread that she aimed for the position of crown princess after attending only one social party, a suffocating position she did not want, even if offered. For these various reasons, she ended up in the academy, somewhat against her will. Events returned to Irene's room, where she was contemplating the tiny uniform and thinking that she would be living with a small child, feeling that her roommate must be wonderful. Meanwhile, her friend noticed that someone had already claimed this room. When her other friend entered, she saw Ivy's simple clothes, and her friends wondered how a commoner girl dared to be Lady Irene's roommate. Then her eyes fell on Ivy. She heard one of her friends say that Lady Irene's roommate had arrived and that she seemed very small. When she knew her name was Ivy Alden from Ilum City, she felt overjoyed by her cuteness and tiny size. But she maintained a neutral facial expression, then suddenly noticed how thin she was. Irene noticed that Ivy's hair was dry as well and wondered if these were signs of mistreatment she had only heard about in stories. And if so, she felt she must help. So she asked her if the orphanage she stayed in starved its children. Ivy strongly denied it, asserting that their director would never do that, and that she was truly kind and wonderful. Irene was shocked by Ivy raising her voice and thought she lacked basic manners, which made Ivy realize she might have said something wrong. Irene's friends intervened and scolded Ivy for raising her voice, demanding she apologize immediately. But Irene stopped them, saying she was the one who should apologize. She felt suffocated by the presence of many people in a small place and decided to go out to breathe some air. Her friends offered to accompany her, but Irene went alone, leaving Ivy behind. Irene thought to herself that she would apologize to Ivy later. But the next day, Ivy went missing during the tour, and Irene didn't get a chance to explain properly. She felt guilty, believing that everything was her fault and that she hadn't paid enough attention to her roommate. And at this rate, she would never have any friend. In the cafeteria, Irene called Ivy and said she wanted to apologize to her. She apologized for rushing to conclusions about the orphanage, explaining she heard bad rumors and misunderstood, and that she never meant to insult the people who truly cared for her. Irene apologized sincerely. Ivy told her that, honestly, whenever people heard she lived in an orphanage, they always pitied her, and every time it hurt her feelings, for the director was always doing her best for them. Irene wondered how much pain she caused Ivy and felt she might not be forgiven, but Ivy smiled and told her she was the first person to ever apologize to her, and thanked her very much. Irene was deeply touched. Ivy also thanked Irene for yesterday's meal. Irene asked in shock how she knew. Ivy told her that one of the staff members told her that she asked about her in a hurry after hearing she was missing. Irene admitted she was really worried after her disappearance and afraid that something bad had happened to her. She commented that Ivy was small and cute, which caused her confusion. Ivy thought to herself that she had thought Lady Irene was noble and mature, like a princess from fairy tales. She realized she had this side as well. The two continued to laugh and exchange conversation for a while. Until Luska and Arcel arrived, they suggested eating with them. Ivy welcomed Arcel warmly. Luska asked Irene for her name, remembering she was from the Terrence family. Irene replied coldly, wondering if there was really a need for formal introductions. Luska noticed that Irene resembled Arcel in her coldness, which confused Ivy, but she soon noticed that everyone was looking at them. At night, Ivy and Irene sat on the bed talking. Ivy reminded Irene that tomorrow was the course registration period, and Ivy asked Irene if she had decided what to choose. Ivy answered that she was still thinking about it, for there were many interesting subjects, but she could only register for 6 subjects because it was the first semester. Ivy asked Irene how she decided on her subjects, and she replied that her family decided that for her, so she didn't have to worry much. Ivy was surprised that this was possible and apologized immediately, but Irene reassured her that she didn't have any specific subjects she wanted to study anyway. Irene wished that Ivy could register for the subject she really wanted, and asked her to tell her if there was any fun class. The next day, Ivy sat in confusion before the course registration papers. There was a lot to decide for just choosing one semester, and she discovered that there were more interesting subjects than she had thought, like Introduction to Imperial Philosophy, which wasn't available in middle school, and Understanding Ancient Languages. But she thought that instead of just fun, it would be better to choose subjects that would help her earn a lot of money after graduation. But she hesitated, fearing the director would be sad if she only learned subjects that helped in employment. So she decided to choose 3 subjects she wanted and 3 subjects that would help her earn money. Only the mathematics subject remained, and since it was a compulsory subject, there was a very large number of professors to choose from. So she decided to think about this later. After the school day ended, the teacher reminded students not to forget to register their subjects. In the cafeteria, Lemura was sitting alone, grumbling that she was eating alone every meal, and that even the children had started to avoid her now. She decided to eat quickly and return. At that moment, she saw Ivy sitting with Irene, Arcel, and Luska, and they were laughing together. While Ivy felt overjoyed eating with them, but Lemora was watching her from afar with anger, thinking that she was walking on eggshells every day because of someone, and that seat should have been hers. She couldn't continue living like this, being pushed aside. To solve this situation, she decided she needed to find Ivy Alden's weakness. Lemora planned to catch Ivy, either by catching her trying to get close to the professors, or by catching her bragging about her relationships with Lord Arcel or Lady Irene, for she was sure that this is what a commoner girl with no connections would do. After silencing her, she would ask her to switch rooms with her, then naturally build a friendship with Lady Irene. But while she was lost, in her dreams, she saw that Ivy had collided with someone and fallen. Irene's friends looked at her with disdain, wondering why Lady Irene even cared about this ugly orphan and that she should treat her like a maid. Lemora felt this cross the line, and she wondered to herself how Ivy could show no emotion on her face, and whether she was subjected to this kind of bullying on a daily basis. Lemora watched the situation from afar and thought to herself how stupid Ivy was, and that if she were in her place, she would have told Lady Irene or Lord Arcel immediately. But she soon convinced herself that it was none of her business, and that Ivy deserved it. Then Ivy was bothered by the same girls again, where they took her bag and mocked it for containing only books. Ivy asked them to return her bag, but they mocked her angry looks. Lemora continued listening to the situation, where one of the bullies described Ivy as a despicable orphan girl, and Lemora remembered how she used to bully Ivy, and how she used to insult her with words and deeds. Feeling ashamed of herself, the girls were telling Ivy that someone like her helps more just by staying silent and not to act beyond her status. Suddenly, Lemora called out to Ivy and told her she had been looking for her for a while. She added that Lady Irene was also looking for her. Then she asked the girls what they were doing and if they were bullying Lady Irene's roommate. They denied it, of course, and claimed they were helping her after she fell on her own and returned her bag to her. Then they left quickly. Ivy thanked Lemora for her help, but Lemora answered her coldly to save her thanks, and that she couldn't stand seeing her being pathetic. Lemora scolded her for standing silent, saying, "That is why nobles look down on them even more." Ivy explained that compared to bullying, in middle school, this was nothing, and that if she responded, the girls would get angry again, remembering how her director scolded the children who threw stones at her. She added that she endured it because they were Lady Irene's friends. Lemora called her a fool. Then she warned her of those children from now on, adding that if she continued to be subjected to disdain, it would reflect negatively on her as well. Then she left. Ivy felt happy holding her bag, for it seemed that things might work out with Lemora soon and that she could worry less now. Then she remembered she hadn't registered her subjects yet. She still hadn't decided on a mathematics professor, so she simply decided to choose the professor at the top of the list, sure that they were all wonderful people. When she went to submit her papers, the teacher asked her to put them in the drawer and wished her to enjoy the classes that would start soon. On her way back, she heard two students grumbling that mathematics was a compulsory subject. When they arrived to submit their papers, one of them was surprised when she saw that someone had registered for the mathematics subject with Professor Malleus. One of the students explained that Professor Malleus was famous even in the academy for his strange personality and incredibly difficult classes. Her friend ruled out that anyone had actually registered with him, suggesting it might be a writing error. A student in the Academy for the Gifted couldn't possibly not know those rumors, but soon the teacher scolded them for prying into others' registration forms. On the first day of study, excitement filled the air. Ivy told her friends she would take the mathematics class with Professor Malleus, and felt a good feeling about starting her day with her favorite subject. While she was walking toward the class, she was planning the questions she would ask the professor. But after a few minutes, she realized the class was further than she had thought. It didn't seem far on the map, and she was lucky she left early. The class was located in East Hall 23, at the far end of the Academy grounds. When she arrived, she felt the building's atmosphere was slightly different from the main building. She wondered if she had gotten the place wrong, for the place looked a bit scary, but she convinced herself that the classroom was the most important thing. When she entered, she found the place empty and covered with dust and cobwebs. She wondered if she had entered the wrong room. Then she noticed something written on the blackboard. It was an announcement from mathematics professor Malleus, stating that anyone who wishes to take this subject must solve 500 advanced mathematics problems by the next class, and that this is the condition for attendance. Ivy was shocked that the next class was only 2 days away and that she had to solve 500 problems. But she soon gathered her resolve, considering this to be the expected level from Academy students, and decided she couldn't fall behind and that she would finish this homework no matter the cost. Later, some students were talking about their first class, and one of them collided with someone. It was Professor Malleus. The girls screamed in fear and ran away. Professor Malleus sighed, grumbling that these children were all the same and that they never learned how to apologize properly. He was tired of these ill-behaved children who didn't have the skill to keep up with his class, yet panicked just by seeing his face. For this reason, he was planning to cancel the subject this year and focus on his research. Then he entered the class, wondering about the identity of the bold fool who registered for his class. He found Ivy, who welcomed him enthusiastically. He looked at her coldly and asked if that was the annoying brat. Professor Malleus seriously asked Ivy if she had finished the homework he assigned her. Ivy replied hesitantly that she had worked on it. However, she couldn't solve everything because there was one problem she didn't understand. The professor smiled mockingly, said he knew it, and declared the class over. Since she didn't finish the assignment, she was unqualified to take his class. He ordered her to go back and cancel her registration for the subject immediately. Ivy begged him to wait a moment and allow her just one question, but he refused, saying the class was over and that he was a busy man. Ivy asked him sadly if it was too much to ask, as she specifically wanted to ask him. The professor sighed and asked her about her question. Ivy explained that she wanted to learn the formula used in this problem because she couldn't understand it from the book. As soon as he glanced at her solutions, he realized her solving method was incredibly clean and good enough to be published in a textbook. He wondered if she had solved the entire massive homework assignment in this manner. The professor asked her why she claimed she couldn't solve this problem when she had solved all the previous ones perfectly. Ivy replied innocently that this problem was of a completely different type. The professor exploded in anger, saying this was ridiculous and that both problems used the exact same formula. Then he ordered her to sit down, saying he would explain clearly where she made her careless mistake. He thought to himself how she had fallen into the trap just because he slightly changed the format of the question. He began the explanation, showing her where she should start interpreting the problem and how to organize the formula correctly. Then he wrote the solution on the blackboard, explaining that the answer comes out simply. He asked her if she understood now, and Ivy replied enthusiastically that she understood completely, expressing her admiration for how easy the solution was after his explanation. The professor felt flattered but hid it, saying there was no need for all this fuss. He was a professor after all. Ivy added that she believed she could solve the rest of the problems now. The professor commented that it seemed she wasn't a total fool. Then he looked at the clock, realizing he had intended to leave immediately. Ivy thanked him for his time and apologized for keeping him so long due to her shortcoming. She told him that she would go to cancel the subject now, but he told her to forget about it. He said there was no need to cancel the subject, and that the real lessons would begin next time, so she must be prepared. Then he left suddenly. Ivy stood stunned for a moment, then realized with overwhelming joy that he had accepted her as his student. On the next class day, Professor Malleus was waiting, wondering if he had made a mistake by accepting Ivy, as he had intentionally requested a distant classroom so the commute to it would be painful. He felt sorry for the girl, but thought there was still time to convince her to cancel the subject. Suddenly, a bright light flooded the room. It was Ivy who gave him a morning greeting with a bright smile. He asked her in surprise if she had cleaned the entire classroom, and she replied affirmatively, explaining that it is difficult to study when there is dust everywhere. She added that she was quite confident in her cleaning skills. The professor thought to himself that he knew she wasn't an ordinary child, but to have this much passion for his class, after she released the spiders that were living there outside, was remarkable. He patted her head, admitting that her deed was commendable, but he told her she needed physical strength to focus on her studies, so there was no need for her to do this from now on. She agreed enthusiastically. Then the lesson began with a new formula. The teacher continued to provide her with knowledge with all sincerity until they became on good terms with each other. After the lesson ended, he assigned her homework, and Ivy thanked him enthusiastically. He watched her as she left, thinking that she was a sincere and kind child, and that he hadn't seen a student like her at the academy in a long time. Most importantly, she possessed genius-level talent. The professor felt very excited. Although he had taught countless pupils over the years, he had never met a child as rewarding to teach as her. She absorbed 2 weeks' worth of material in one day, and if nurtured properly, she could become a brilliant mathematician who surpasses him. He wondered if there was any way to help her. Then he remembered a way. He decided to go to Seraphina. Seraphina scolded Malleus and reminded him not to call her by her first name on campus. Seraphina asked him why he was here. In the cafeteria, Irene, Ivy, Luska, and Arcel were sitting together, and Luska mocked Irene because she didn't want to sit with them. While Ivy was solving her math homework enthusiastically, Luska wondered what she was doing. Irene told him to be quiet, explaining that she was doing the homework given to her by Professor Malleus, which shocked Luska. Luska wondered if Ivy didn't know the bad rumors about Professor Malleus, which caught Ivy's attention. Luska explained that the professor is famous for his eccentricities, that his classes are difficult and he gives a lot of homework, making everyone avoid him because their grades drop. Arcel added that, unlike other professors, Malleus doesn't really care about his students, making it difficult to get a recommendation or build relationships after graduation. He advised Ivy to think about it again, but Ivy defended the professor, saying he was really kind and that studying was fun because he explained things well. Thanks to him, she had already finished 2 chapters of advanced mathematics. Everyone was shocked to hear that, and that Professor Malleus was kind. Arcel wondered about Professor Malleus's reasoning for pushing the curriculum so fast since the beginning of the semester. Then he suddenly realized that Ivy might have registered for Professor Malleus's class on purpose to surpass everyone. He felt he had been short-sighted and that he shouldn't have avoided the class just because of rumors. Instead, he should have thought of utilizing it as Ivy did. He realized that if he remained idle, his position at the top of the class might be in danger, so he decided he would try to take Professor Malleus's class too. Luska asked him in surprise if he was going to change his registration, and Arcel confirmed it, causing Luska to grumble that it would be boring to take his class alone, and decided he would change his registration too. Irene noticed that the three of them would be taking the same class without her. She imagined that this might mean Ivy could become closer to them than to her, which made her anxious. So she decided she might try the class too, justifying it by saying that Professor Wicker's teaching style didn't suit her. Ivy was overjoyed and wondered if that meant the four of them would take the same class together. While Ivy was excited about the idea, the others were feeling the pressure of competition, determined not to fall behind. On the next class day, Professor Malleus was walking toward the class thinking about what he would teach Ivy today, and decided to reduce her homework so she wouldn't get tired. He expected her to have arrived first as usual. He even brought her snacks, imagining how happy she would be when she discovered them. But he heard voices from behind the door, where Luska and Arcel were trying to convince Ivy to change her professor, pointing out the bad rumors about Malleus. This angered the professor, who wondered how these bastards dared to try to steal his child. He opened the door angrily, shouting about who these bastards were, who dared to enter his class. But Ivy interrupted him with a bright morning greeting. The professor looked angrily at the other students, wondering who these bastards were telling her to take another class. The rest felt tense and silence-filled the place, as none of them could step forward to speak. Irene tried to explain the situation, saying there were several reasons for that, and that she realized something after coming to this class today, which was that the class was too far away. Arcel and Luska agreed with her opinion. The professor tried to downplay the matter, saying it was still within the academy grounds, and that if they left a little earlier, there would be no problem. But Irene interrupted him, saying that of course they could hurry. But because of that, Ivy was wandering around without eating her breakfast, and was starving because of his class. She added that due to the excessive homework, dark circles appeared on her cute little face. Luska added that she bruised her knee yesterday because she tripped while running, and that she would have to carry more books. They wondered if he didn't feel sorry for a little girl like Ivy. The professor admitted he hadn't thought about it that far. Irene told him that if he didn't want Ivy to change her classes, he must somehow get her a classroom closer to the main building. The professor was confused and promised that he was already planning to do so. Irene was happy and said the burden of going back and forth would be reduced for them too. The professor was surprised by her saying them, wondering when he said he would teach them all. Irene explained that they had certainly submitted their formal applications for the class. The professor found no escape, so he told them they could take the class if they applied, but reminded them that he taught advanced mathematics only and wondered if they were sure of their ability to keep up. Irene confidently declared she could keep up, which annoyed Professor Malleus. So he decided to give them a problem, and if they could solve it, he would allow them to join the class. He gave them a time limit of only 15 minutes, saying if they couldn't handle this, it would be difficult for them to take his class. Ivy looked at the problem and realized it was much harder than what she had learned, wondering if they would be able to solve it. The test began, and after only 2 minutes, Arcel announced he would finish his answer, much to the surprise of the others. The professor took his paper and was impressed by his clean calculations and perfect solution, admitting that he was indeed the son of Duke Kalen. The professor announced his success reluctantly, and Arcel looked forward to working with him. After 8 minutes, Luska announced that he had solved it too. The professor wondered how he did it. He asked him how he thought of using the Tarsal formula here, and Luska replied innocently that he had only learned up to that point, so he tried to fit it. The professor thought to himself how this lucky bastard discovered a new mathematical formula by accident, so he announced his success for the time being, which made Luska happy. Ivy looked at the remaining time and realized that less than 5 minutes were left, feeling worried for Irene. But Irene seemed calm while she was writing. Ivy admired her calmness under this much pressure, and was confident she wouldn't fail. But inside, Irene was panicking, wondering how this problem could be solved. Earlier, Professor Malleus was talking with Serafina. Serafina asked the professor what he wanted from her. Malleus told her he wanted to know more about the student Ivy Alden. He announced he would become her guardian because she was a brilliant and talented child who would become a great mathematician following in his footsteps. Serafina told him the child already had a guardian, which angered Malleus, who wondered who it was and if they were someone more wonderful than him. Serafina refused to tell him for security reasons, so Malleus insisted that he was better because he was the greatest mathematician in the Empire, and demanded they switch roles. He asked her for the address to go and talk to the guardian himself, but she told him that was difficult. Serafina scolded Professor Malleus for his actions and bid him farewell. She felt relieved to finally be rid of him and apologized to him in her mind, explaining that the identity of the guardian is not usually a secret, but there are special circumstances this time. Elsewhere, the Prime Minister was talking to the Emperor and telling him that the time for the cabinet meeting was almost due. The Emperor noticed the Prime Minister had been taking good measures to combat insects lately. Meanwhile, Irene was feeling the pressure of the remaining time, wondering what she should do and if she would be the only one to fail. She remembered her former teacher who used to ask her what she did when she didn't even understand the nature of the problem. The teacher told her that she had already learned almost all formulas, so there should be no problem she couldn't solve. But Irene admitted she always gets confused about which formula to use. The teacher explained that this is where her skill shows. Irene thought about trying every formula she knew, believing she would discover the solution in the end. The teacher agreed that this was a technically possible way, but very inefficient. Irene realized she had already learned all the basic formulas. She decided that instead of sitting and waiting for failure, she would try everything she could. She began trying formulas one by one at an amazing speed. Luska and Ivy were surprised by her speed. Irene continued to exclude the wrong formulas. With only 30 seconds left, only one formula remained. Irene submitted her paper in the final seconds. The professor announced it was the correct answer. The exam ended, and Luska expressed his great admiration for her extraordinary ability. Professor Malleus noticed that she applied many formulas in a short time, and although the method was incredibly inefficient, it was only possible because her mind works at an unnatural speed, which is typical of the Terrence family known for producing many successful entrepreneurs. The professor announced that, as promised, they could all attend his class, but he asked them to promise not to bring any other students because he couldn't stand anymore. The professor suggested he would find a new classroom in the main building, which made the students happy. Then they told the professor they looked forward to his lectures. Luska felt confused. Arcel wondered what had changed suddenly, as they had passed the test perfectly. But soon Luska began complaining about the mountain of homework on the first day. Irene told him to be quiet because she couldn't focus because of him. Luska mocked her, saying she was worse than him at studying, which led to a minor quarrel between them. Ivy announced she had finished her homework, which surprised the others. She explained that it was thanks to the kind professor's teaching, so Arcel felt defeated. Suddenly, Ivy felt hungry and wondered why this was happening. Luska noticed that and suggested they go to eat. In the crowded cafeteria, Ivy decided she would have a sandwich. Irene noticed that Ivy always eats sandwiches and asked her if there was a reason for that. Ivy replied hesitantly that the reason, honestly, was that she didn't recognize anything else on the menu, and that choosing a sandwich was easier than stressing over the options. Luska and Arcel intervened, wondering what they were waiting for, and urged them to order. Ivy stood before the flashy dishes, wondering if there were really dishes like these. Ivy realized that although sandwiches are great, this might be why no one else ordered them. Ivy asked Luska and Arcel for the names of their dishes, wondering if she was thinking of ordering the same thing, but she explained that she wanted to try something different and was really curious about what they offered as well. Irene suggested they order a plate of everything. Ivy was surprised by the idea, worried that they would leave a lot of leftover food and that they might get negative points for wasting food. Irene reassured her that the cafeteria only has 10 items on the menu and that the two young men would finish everything somehow. The two young men felt they had been deceived again by Irene. Indeed, they brought a variety of delicious dishes. Irene asked Ivy which dish she wanted to try first. Luska recommended the traditional Western dish, while Arcel suggested the lamb steak with herb butter. As for Irene, she praised the fruit soup with southern berries. Ivy was torn as to which dish she should taste first. She decided to try Irene's dish, who encouraged her to do so. While Ivy was eating, she found it extremely delicious. It was the first time she had eaten something of this quality. Irene felt happy because it suited her taste and told her to eat slowly so she wouldn't get a stomachache. Ivy noticed that Luska had already eaten 2 plates. Luska tried to teach her something useful, claiming he was the fragile one among them. Then he pointed to Arcel, who had already eaten 4 plates, much to the surprise of Ivy and Irene. Arcel scolded him for pointing at people. The two young men continued eating at an amazing speed. Within seconds, they had finished 8 plates between them. Luska asked if they wanted to order more, and Arcel replied with, maybe. Then Luska told Arcel that the Duke's sons had invited them for lunch the next day, and asked if he would come. Arcel refused, saying it was annoying and that he would stay and eat with Ivy. Luska was angry, accusing him of abandoning him after he only agreed because he kept telling him they needed to communicate more. But Arcel replied that he feels more comfortable doing things in his usual way. Luska denounced Arcel's talk about his usual way, noting that his actions had been truly strange lately, which surprised Arcel, who wondered if he meant him. Luska confirmed his words enthusiastically, reminding Arcel of the long time it took him to feel comfortable with him personally. He added, wondering how now, suddenly, he chooses to spend his time with someone else, and even does so without his company. But Luska corrected himself with a cunning smile, claiming that maybe he understood the real reason behind Arcel's actions. Arcel became more confused and asked what exactly he understood. Luska was surprised by his question and asked him to think carefully about who Ivy reminded him of. Arcel suddenly and decisively changed the subject, announcing that he would order another dish of crème brûlée, leaving Luska in a state of confusion, wondering about the reason for this sudden talk. Arcel thought to himself that Luska's reaction was natural, as he had never spent time with anyone else before. But in truth, he never thought Ivy resembled a specific person. While he was lost in his thoughts, he saw Ivy talking and laughing with Irene. Then that image overlapped with another memory from the past. This memory brought him back to an image of a lady with red hair and green eyes, who had appeared before him and Luska when they were children, and asked them if they were the 2 children Chloe mentioned. The lady told them she was on her way to pick some apples, then offered to accompany them with a warm smile. Memories took him back to a journey in a luxury carriage, where his father was telling him that this was the first time he came to this remote place, and that the crown prince was the one who insisted on holding the wedding there. His father added that the landscapes are beautiful, and that this trip would be an opportunity for him to meet many prominent figures, so it wouldn't be a bad experience for him. Arkel at that time was a 5-year-old child named Arcel Kirin. When his father asked him if he was tired, he replied that he was fine, and that a member of the Kirin family should endure at least this much, which impressed his father, who saw in him the son he had always expected. Then his father asked him if he got along well with Luska. Arcel replied in the affirmative, confirming that there were no particular problems between them. His father expressed his satisfaction and advised him to continue getting along with him and not to quarrel. He explained to him that they would likely work together for a long time in the future, just as he and Marquis Ragself did. Little Arcel thought to himself sarcastically, wondering how he could work with that immature bastard Luska, and couldn't imagine that happening. Arcel felt the matter was inevitable and that he would just have to take the initiative. Then he gathered his courage and asked his father about something he wanted to know. He told him he heard something about the person the crown prince would marry this time. He wondered if the rumor saying she was a witch was true, which surprised his father. His father sighed, wondering how such rumors reached him, and advised him not to believe every rumor he hears without scrutiny, explaining that they may be true sometimes, but most of the time they are not. At that moment, the carriage driver announced their arrival. His father said he trusts that Arcel understood what he meant, and asked him to go for a walk while preparations were underway. When they got out of the carriage, another man greeted them, welcoming Duke Kirin and apologizing for being late. The Duke asked him how things were progressing, and he replied that they had just begun preparing, which prompted the Duke to urge them to hurry. Arcel set off on his walk and soon spotted Luska running, so he called out to him, asking where he was rushing like that. Luska welcomed him in surprise. Luska told him he was bored, so he decided to go play in the forest and asked him enthusiastically if the idea sounded fun, which made Arcel hesitate and think about the forest. Arcel remembered at that moment a stern warning he received in the past, where he was advised never to enter the forest alone without a specific reason, and to take a night with him if he had to, as he might lose his way, and dangers would loom with the onset of darkness. But Luska did not care about these fears, and announced that if Arcel was not coming, he would go alone. So he set off quickly, prompting Arcel to shout, trying to stop him. Arcel caught up with him, shouting that the forest is a dangerous place, wondering anxiously what he would do if he lost his way. In the midst of their running, the red-haired lady suddenly appeared before them, greeted them, then asked if they were the 2 children Chloe was talking about. The lady told them she was on her way to pick apples now and invited them to join her. Arcel was stunned, realizing immediately that this lady was the same person the rumors were about, and memory took him back to a conversation he had heard between 2 ladies where they said that that woman frequents the forest every day, and that there is something unsettling about her that makes her look like a witch. They continued their conversation, expecting that she must be hiding a hideout deep in the forest, where she conducts suspicious experiments in secret, and that she succeeded in trapping the crown prince in her nets using evil magic. Fear took hold of Arcel as he imagined she might drag them with her to use as test subjects, so he rejected the idea categorically in his mind. But quite the opposite of him, Luska enthusiastically agreed to the invitation, leaving Arcel in a state of terror. Arcel tried to dissuade Luska in a whisper, trying to tell him the identity of that lady, but Luska ignored him indifferently and told him he could stay here if he didn't want to go. Luska didn't look back to his warning, but rather set off running after the lady. So Arcel called him, trying to stop him, then muttered to himself, calling him a fool. Arcel felt angry at the idea that his friend followed a witch for just a few apples, while Luska was asking the lady innocently if they could eat apples while picking them. Arcel stood convinced that he had done everything he could, and that the responsibility from now on lay with Luska. But he soon hesitated. If he left him like this, he might fall victim to black magic, and there would be no one else to help him but him. And he remembered his father's words advising him not to quarrel with Luska, and to continue to get along with him. So he felt resentful of this situation. Arcel sighed, grumbling that this was truly painful. Arcel decided to follow them from a distance, determined to intervene and save Luska immediately if the witch did anything suspicious. But he was surprised at how far away they already were from him. So he quickened his steps, trying to catch up with them, and heard them exchanging conversation. Arcel noticed something strange. Although he was running as fast as possible, he felt that the distance between him and them was constantly increasing. Fearing he would lose them completely, he increased his speed. But his foot suddenly slipped on the edge of a slope, and he felt surprised for a moment. Arcel fell in pain, and when he tried to get up, he realized he couldn't move and wondered if he had broken something. Suddenly, he heard Luska's voice calling him, and when he raised his head, he found him and the lady looking at him anxiously from the top of the slope. The lady looked at him seriously and realized his injury looked very bad. To his surprise, he found her descending before him gracefully, so he felt terrified, wondering what was happening, and the thought occurred to him that she might exploit this opportunity to capture him. He felt completely helpless as he sat on the ground holding his injured leg, for he realized he couldn't escape. As she approached him, he shouted in her face desperately, asking her to stay away and calling her a witch. Arcel warned her loudly, announcing he was the son of Duke Kirin, and threatened her that he would tell his father if she approached him any closer. But she didn't stop, so he shouted in panic, asking her not to approach, and closed his eyes tightly while trembling with fear. While he was covering his face with his arm, expecting the worst, a bright light flooded the place, much to his surprise. He opened his eyes to find her kneeling before him, her hands shining with a warm light as she gently touched his injured leg. With a kind smile, she told him to look and that everything had become better now. Arcel looked at his leg in amazement, finding the wound had completely disappeared. He wondered to himself if witches possess this kind of power too, and concluded that her real goal must be something else. So he gathered his courage and asked her directly what she wanted, but she seemed surprised by his question. Arcel insisted she treated him because she wanted something in return, and repeated his question about what she wanted from him. Then he assumed she saved him out of greed for his family's status, and told her that unfortunately for her, she would have to talk to his father about that. But she surprised him when she flicked his forehead lightly, causing him shock, and she told him with a smile that he was as eccentric as Luska, and he wondered to himself angrily how she dared to touch his forehead. Then she calmly taught him that the first thing he should say when someone helps him is, "Thank you." Events returned to the present time, where Arcel was smiling slightly, remembering that Lillian was always like that. He admitted to himself that he tried not to think about her as much as possible since he was no longer able to see her and thought he had succeeded in forgetting her well until now. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by Ivy's voice apologizing for accidentally dropping her fork. Luska reassured her that it was okay. Arcel wondered to himself why he remembered Lillian whenever he looked at Ivy and suspected that Luska might have said something unnecessary. Arcel stood up calmly and offered Ivy to bring her a new fork. She initially refused, saying there was no need to trouble himself, but she soon changed her mind and said she would go with him. So Arcel agreed, and they headed together to get the fork. While they were walking, Ivy thanked him for his constant concern for her, and he replied that it was not worth mentioning. Then she stopped and asked him hesitantly about something she wanted to know. Ivy asked him directly why he was so kind to her. Her question surprised Arcel, so Ivy explained that she was just curious and that she realized he was kind to everyone. But this question brought him back to that distant memory again, where Luska was running happily declaring he was first, while Lillian was asking him to be careful so he wouldn't fall. Lillian noticed their vitality, while Arcel was looking at her silently, then asked her the same question Ivy just asked. Why was she so kind to them? He admitted to her that they believed the rumors and called her a witch. Luska teased him, noting that he was the only one who doubted her and even hurt his leg. Lillian laughed at the situation, while Arcel was angry at his comment. Luska commented that he didn't know what he did, but she interrupted their quarrel, saying she actually knew the reason. Then Lillian placed her hands on their heads tenderly and told them they would one day become very important people to her child. Lillian added that she expects they will spend a long time together and that thanks to them, that child will grow up very happy. Then she placed her hands on their small faces, explaining they would be sad together sometimes and rejoice together at other times. And she asked them to become good friends to her child. Ivy's anxious voice brought him back to reality, as she was calling his name and asking him if he was okay. Ivy noticed his absence of mind, so she apologized for her sudden question and told him there was no need to answer if he didn't want to. But Arcel smiled calmly and answered her that the reason was that they are friends. Shyness took hold of Ivy, whose face turned red as she repeated the word friends in her head. That moment was interrupted by the voice of Luska and Irene calling them. Luska wondered what they were doing, accusing Arcel of trying to monopolize Ivy for himself, and urged them to hurry and return. With a sudden enthusiasm, Ivy moved before Arcel and invited him to return to the table. Arcel smiled as he watched her and thought to himself that although the idea might seem ridiculous, he wondered why Ivy, and while the others were exchanging conversation and jokes, the idea was completed in his head, wondering, why does she look like Lillian's child? The next morning, Ivy knocked on Irene's room door and asked if she was awake. She allowed her to enter. When she entered to give the morning greeting, she was surprised by Irene's appearance. Ivy expressed her deep admiration for Irene's elegant clothes. Irene returned the greeting kindly. Ivy was surprised by her appearance and wondered if today was a special occasion. Irene told her she apparently didn't know. Irene explained that today was Guardian Day, an event dedicated to each student where a guardian sends them encouraging gifts. Irene added that the lobby would be filled with gifts soon, but she would have to go out to receive her gift, which seemed unnecessarily expensive, and she told her she might return late in the afternoon, which shocked Ivy. Ivy enthusiastically admitted she didn't know there was a day for receiving gifts and that she had never received a gift before. Irene suddenly realized she probably wouldn't get anything. Irene tried to comfort her, claiming the matter is not as fun as it seems and that the noble's children would just use the opportunity to show off. Then she promised her she would buy her some delicious sweets on her way back, which made Ivy very happy, calling her the best. Irene looked at the clock and realized she must go now. She bid farewell to Ivy, who wished her a safe trip. Ivy stood in the lobby fascinated by the scene, as piles of gifts filled the place, and realized this was the Guardian Day event. She had never seen this amount of gift boxes in her life before and decided to move forward to see the scene up close. But she heard two students whispering in surprise about why she was here, asserting that she wouldn't get a gift anyway, and that she was spoiling the atmosphere. Ivy's features changed, and she thought to herself that Irene's words were correct and that she should watch for a bit and then return. At that moment, one of the teachers caught everyone's attention and announced she would start calling names to deliver the gifts. When she called Alicia Lydia, a girl stepped forward enthusiastically to receive her gift, which turned out to be a jeweled pin that impressed the students, while Alicia pretended the matter was not worth all the fuss. The employee continued calling out names, such as Hemart Vermeulen, Jovia Schultz, and Raoul Nessler, and the students stepped forward happily to receive their gifts. Ivy watched the scene with a smile, for even though she was not the one receiving the gifts, seeing the happy faces of the other children made her feel satisfied as well. One of the girls announced that she was going to her room to open her gift. While Ivy was watching her, she heard two other students whispering mockingly, concluding that the girl must be unsure of her gift because she was hiding it, and that it might be cheap. Ivy was affected by this talk, wondering if the girl felt ashamed because her gift was not expensive, and she thought to herself that she would have been happy to receive anything. She felt that she should return now, especially since she had to prepare for tomorrow's lesson. As she turned to leave, she suddenly heard the employee call out the name Ivy Alden. Ivy stopped in her tracks, thinking she had misheard, as her name couldn't possibly have been called. But the employee repeated the question, wondering if Miss Ivy Alden was not present, so Ivy stepped forward quickly, announcing her presence. The employee handed her an elegant pink gift box and asked her to accept it, and Ivy felt her heart rate quicken. She wondered in amazement if this gift was really for her. This was the first time she had received a gift wrapped with such care, and she felt as if she were in a fairy tale. She wondered enthusiastically what kind of gift was inside, and decided to return to her room to open it carefully. But on her way, the voice of a girl calling her stopped her, and when she turned around, she found it was the same girl who had been mocking the other student. The girl asked Ivy to hand her the gift, claiming she needed to check something. When Ivy asked her what she was going to check, the girl replied with disdain that the matter was obvious, and that there was something wrong, as a poor girl from an orphanage could not receive such a luxury gift. Ivy hesitated, believing that it couldn't be true. The other students began to whisper, agreeing with the girl and wondering if Ivy had taken someone else's gift by mistake, and even doubted the existence of a guardian for her in the first place. Ivy tried to defend herself, asserting that her name was clearly written on the gift, but the girl did not believe her, claiming that the name itself might be written incorrectly, and mockingly asked her what made her think she deserved it. Then she ordered her to hand it over, but another voice interrupted them, ordering them to stop this. It was a girl with red hair, who stood before them firmly and said there was no evidence that this gift did not belong to Miss Ivy, and that they were judging her in haste. Ivy was dazzled by her beauty and wondered to herself about her identity. Then the girl turned toward Ivy and kindly asked her if she was okay. One of the students recognized her as Lady Ezrella, and they wondered in amazement why she was helping a commoner girl. Ivy remembered hearing the name Ezrella mentioned as much as Irene's name, but the bullying girl did not give up and addressed Ezrella directly, asking if she didn't find the matter strange too, namely the fact that a girl from an orphanage had received a gift. Ezrella answered her calmly that she did not find the matter strange and that Ivy might also have a guardian, but the girl insisted that the wrapping paper used was not common. Ezrella noticed her persistence, then turned to Ivy and said she didn't like this suggestion herself, but she suggested to her that she open the gift there, in front of everyone. Ivy thought to herself that she had planned to return to her room and open the gift with the utmost care so that she could keep the wrapping paper, but she realized that the current situation did not allow her to refuse. However, if opening the gift would remove the misunderstanding, she decided to ask them to wait for a moment. She began to untie the ribbon gently, trying not to wrinkle the wrapping paper. But the bullying girl lost her patience and grumbled angrily how frustrating this situation was, then snatched the gift from her hands, shouting at her to stop stalling. Ivy fell backward while the wrapping paper was violently torn. With a mocking smile, the girl said she was right and that the sorry state of the gift indicated it was indeed intended for Ivy. She continued her mockery, saying that it was not expected for a girl from an orphanage to get a decent guardian anyway. Then she carried the small wooden box that was inside with disgust, claiming it looked so dirty that she didn't even want to hold it anymore. Then she threw the box toward her with disdain, declaring that she could have it back. The box opened in the air and a black ball fell out onto the ground. Ivy sat on the floor looking at the ball with tears in her eyes. The other students began to whisper, wondering about the nature of that gift and guessing it was just a rock. Two students mocked the situation, and one of them wondered if this was really her gift, to which the other replied that it suited her level perfectly. The bullying girl continued her mockery, considering the matter funny and wondering where someone could pick up such a stone, while another suggested that maybe it was from the orphanage yard. Ezrella approached Ivy and asked her if she was okay. She admitted to herself that she didn't expect things to get this bad. While the bullying students were laughing, Ivy clenched her hand as she sat on the floor next to the stone. Ivy interrupted them and told them that throwing the gift was crossing the line. Ivy stood up, picked up the ball, and loudly declared that although this gift might not seem valuable to others, to her, it was a precious gift from her guardian. As soon as she said that, the black stone in her hand began to glow with a bright golden light, much to her surprise. Ivy wondered to herself what this light was and how the stone was glowing. The other students were stunned, wondering what was happening and admitting they had never seen anything like this before. Suddenly, one of the students recognized the stone and screamed that it was a magic stone. One of the books explained that a magic stone is a mysterious stone that holds magical power within it. It is considered a precious treasure since ancient times due to its rarity, showing different effects according to its size and type, and is of high value as collectibles not only for mages but for high-ranking nobles as well. The students wondered in amazement if magic stones were that rare, and another added she had heard that a stone the size of a fingernail was more expensive than a diamond ring, so they concluded that Ivy's guardian must be a great figure. Ivy was holding the glowing stone, amazed by its light, but she noticed it was warmer than anything else. Soon the atmosphere changed completely as the students crowded around her, and one of them asked to touch it, while another wanted to see it up close. The glowing stone sparked the excitement of the students who crowded around Ivy, expressing their desire to touch it even just once. Ivy felt confused by this sudden attention and asked them to wait. From a distance, Ezrella was watching the situation. Then she let out a loud laugh, which caught the attention of everyone around her. Then she stepped forward, apologizing and admitting that she couldn't help herself because the scene was so amusing. Ezrella surprised everyone by announcing that she had realized from the first moment that this magic stone was fake. She explained, as everyone knows, that the capital's markets have recently been filled with street vendors selling imitation rocks that resemble magic stones. Accordingly, she confidently concluded that the gift Miss Ivy received is nothing but a cheap imitation integrated with some simple and laughable magic. The students' attitudes quickly changed as they began to agree with Ezrella, noting that the stone looked different now, and wondering logically who would gift an expensive magic stone. As for Ivy, she looked at the stone in silence, thinking to herself that it didn't matter to her whether the gift was real or fake, and all that saddened her was her wondering why things always ended this way for her. A familiar voice interrupted her silence, wondering what exactly was happening, and Ivy immediately recognized its owner. It was Irene who suddenly appeared and looked at the scene sharply. Ivy was surprised by her arrival. Ezrella commented coldly on Irene's striking appearance, noting that this style had not changed in her and addressing her as Irene Terran. This encounter brought back to Ezrella's mind memories of the past, when she was known as the flower of high society and the object of every girl's envy. She was enjoying her status at one of her parties, until the arrival of that person was announced. It was the first time the youngest daughter of the Terran family had appeared in high society, and she stole the spotlight from her. At that party, Ezrella asked the others to make way, and welcomed Lady Irene as the hostess of the party. As a token of welcome, she offered her a small gift, but she noticed that the table was already full of Irene's gifts, so she took the initiative in a condescending manner to offer to remove those modest gifts. And she revealed her gift, which was a pair of shoes. Ezrella boasted that the shoes were a new design from a famous store, and there were only 3 pairs in the entire empire, making them a treasure that could not be obtained. The other girls praised the gift, while Ezrella asked Irene not to feel embarrassed about accepting it, but Irene replied calmly, saying she was wondering why the shoes looked familiar, as they closely resembled a pair she bought 3 months ago. Ezrella was shocked, so Irene added that this style was already considered old in the South. Ezrella did not believe what she heard, asserting that the designer himself had told her otherwise. The students were whispering about Irene's boldness in treating the arrogant Ezrella, expressing their desire to get close to her. As for Ezrella, she was seething with anger, thinking to herself that Irene's late appearance and stealing her status were not enough, but she had to humiliate her as well. Ezrella thought about everything she hated in Irene, starting from that look that made her feel as if Irene was looking down at her, to that reserved attitude that showed no weakness at all. She admitted in her heart that she didn't like anything about Irene, and even now, by appearing at this decisive moment, she was doing nothing but ruining her plans again. Ezrella stepped toward Irene with confident strides and addressed her in a pretentious manner, claiming she thought Lady Irene was under the influence of a simple misunderstanding. Irene replied coldly, asking what misunderstanding she was talking about, then demanded she explain to her exactly what was going on here. her. Ezrella tried to justify her position, claiming she was just trying to restore order and that Miss Ivy was causing a commotion by showing off a fake magic stone as if it were real. Irene repeated her words slowly, asking if she was saying it was a fake magic stone. Ezrella smiled mockingly and said this seemed logical. Since Lady Irene had not stayed in the capital long, it was natural she would not be aware of the matter. Ezrella continued her explanation, clarifying that imitation magic stones had spread widely in the markets recently, and despite that, Miss Ivy stubbornly insisted her stone was genuine. Then she sighed in a theatrical manner, adding that there were already bad rumors circulating about Ivy's lack of respect for nobles, and that as her colleague, she could not stand by and watch such behavior. Irene looked at Ezrella sharply and told her that the truly ignorant person here was her. Ezrella was surprised by her words, so Irene asked her if she had forgotten she was a member of the Terran family. She explained that her family not only deals with the majority of magic stones sold at auction, but that she has been extensively trained in the family's business since her childhood. Accordingly, she asserted that it was impossible for her to fail to distinguish something this simple. Then Irene swore in the name of her family that what Ivy was carrying was a genuine magic stone. Ivy looked at her with emotion, whispering her name. Then Irene bumped into Ezrella coldly and told her that if she had nothing to say, she should step aside gently, then turned toward Ivy and asked her if she was okay. Ezrella stood silent in her place while the other students began to whisper, wondering if Lady Ezrella had made a mistake. They added that she had acted very arrogantly and cornered Ivy in this way. Ezrella did not believe what happened, and muttered to herself that this was impossible, wondering how a commoner girl could possess a magic stone. The girl who had been bothering Ivy approached her and asked if she was okay. She tried to comfort her, saying that Lady Irene was very harsh and that Ezrella's logic was perfectly sound. But Ezrella looked with a sharp gaze when the girl commented that Irene had been acting overly kind to that commoner girl recently. While she was watching Irene checking on Ivy's condition, she went back in her memory to that reserved image of Irene Terran and wondered to herself if Irene had ever shown such sincere feelings before. A wicked smile appeared on Ezrella's face, who found the matter very amusing, for she did not expect that Irene, who seemed without any weaknesses at all, had developed such a weakness. In the meantime, Irene was taking Ivy with her, suggesting that they go to her room to rest.